discussing a particular historical topic from a particular historical time. A happy Sunday to all of you from us at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Hope your new year is going well. And today we are going to be discussing not one, but two topics. You can vote every weekend here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel on the topic you would like to see for the live stream lecture, and we had a tie. We had a tie between the Renaissance, which I have lectured about before, and the Ottoman Empire, which I really haven't lectured about before. And one could argue that one of them causes the other, but I'm here in my studio wearing my usual smoking jacket with my new retro microphone. So pull up something hot and fun, something hot to drink, and enjoy and sit back and listen to the fun. And we will talk about both of these historical topics, kind of in the order that they occur, in the order of their significance and importance. The Ottoman Empire lasts a lot longer, but it actually predates the Renaissance. So I am going to discuss the Ottomans first, and then after that, I will take you on a journey through the Renaissance. So it's going to be Middle Eastern, Turkish history, and then we're going to be focusing on Europe, as I am able to talk about something that's not Western for a little bit, which is always fun and exciting for me to do. But if you like and enjoy history, please consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as all of that. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. A very happy Sunday to all of you. And there's our background. This is the Ottoman capital. This is the capital of the Byzantine Empire. This is one of the most famous cities in all of the world. And although it is now known as Istanbul, it actually wasn't named Istanbul until after the Ottoman Empire fell. It was still the city of Constantinople, according to the Byzantines, as they had named it after Constantine had built his Nova Roma, a new capital, in the 4th century, and the Byzantines eventually conquer it, and this is kind of the apex and zenith of their rise to power, and where they get to show off their greatest military feature. If the Ottomans are known for anything, it's their military conquests and their siege warfare, which allows them to destroy the Byzantine Empire. An empire that had clearly been in decline for some centuries by that time, but got the death nail when the Ottomans hit it in 1453. So if anyone knows the history of the Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Empire, you probably know about 1453 being one of the most important years in all of human history, mainly because it is the fall of the last vestiges of the Roman Empire, with the Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, collapsing under the attack of the Ottomans, a very powerful empire that obviously a lot of you have probably heard about before. Something that I've talked about on this channel a lot is the formation, and did an entire live stream lecture on, was the formation of the modern Middle East. And the formation of the modern Middle East comes from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And I believe I've lectured actually on both the Ottoman Empire and the Renaissance, but with a tied vote in the YouTube chat. I'm perfectly okay with lecturing about both topics. So we're getting two, not one, but two mini live stream lectures from the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel today. One about the Ottomans and another about the Renaissance. And I will be discussing both, starting with the Ottomans because they actually technically start before. So the story of the Ottoman Empire cannot be told without, of course, Constantinople, or Istanbul as it is now called. This is the Hagia Sophia, the famous church that is built by Justinian, that is later transformed into a mosque by the Ottomans as a sign of their dominance and control and conquest of the Byzantine Empire, and their integration of former Byzantine territories into their lands, and their dominance over the Balkans and southeastern Europe, as well as Greece, the Bosporus, the Dardanelles, all of that area that is around Constantinople and the western part of Asia Minor. Now, a little quick history lesson. Can you not hear me? Can no one hear me? A little quick history lesson on the Byzantines and the Ottomans and that entire dynamic. The term Turkey, which we use to refer to the, and yes, this is a live stream lecture. Maybe at the end of our time, I will have time to actually answer questions like I normally do on Fridays and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. We do short form content videos every day and long form content usually twice a week. It comes out Mondays and Fridays usually. Okay, thank you for listening. So yes, we are talking about we'll talk about Sultan Mehmed the Great, the Conqueror, and Suleiman the Magnificent, and all of these incredible rulers in a minute as we discuss the live stream lecture of the Ottomans, which will shift to the Renaissance later. So welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. If you like history and social studies, I suggest that you like and subscribe. I think you're in the right place. And indeed, the Ottomans did indeed come and conquer quite a bit. However, just a little background on Turkey and its standing in the ancient world. Nobody called it Turkey in the 5th century or in the 3rd century or in the BC time. The Romans did not refer to the land as Turkey. Turkey, like Germany, Turkey is a relatively later name for the country. And of course, it wasn't known as Turkey during the Ottomans. It was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turks were the most successful and powerful of the Turkish raiders and groups that eventually conquered and controlled the land of Asia Minor. Asia Minor was what the Romans called it. It's what the Middle Easterners had called it. The Persians and the Greeks had called it this. It was the land separating, really, and still is, the crossroads between Europe and Asia, the southwestern portion of Asia, which is technically Middle East, is part of Asia that we call the Middle East. So Turkey had a liminal place in history. Asia Minor did, whatever you want to call it. And of course, now we know that today as Turkey. The people that really kind of get the reputation of being the Turks that settle in that region are the Seljuks, who kind of come to power in the 10th and 11th centuries. They're the ones who, through their aggression in conquering the Middle East and their oppression of Christian pilgrims, trigger the First Crusade in 1095. So there's the Seljuk Turks. There's different Turkic groups, the Tatars, who eventually settle in Russia and are a continual bane on the existence of the Muscovites, are another example. But Turkish peoples had existed for long periods of time and have migrated back and forth across the Bosphorus to the Balkans, as well as into Europe, but also east into South and Central Asia, as well as the Middle East. So referring to Turks is really referring to anciently, and in the medieval context even, different tribes of people who settled and traveled in different areas, the majority of whom eventually became Muslim, but were not Muslim to begin with. That entire region was conquered by the Romans and eventually became part of the Byzantine Christian sphere of influence. In fact, many of the early Christian writings were centered around these areas in Turkey, in Asia Minor. So the area was Christian for quite some time. The Islamic conquest changed that, and then Asia Minor once again became a crossroads, a military crossroads in the medieval period between the rising power of Islam and the Christian Byzantine Empire, which suffered decline in the 8th and 9th centuries, but resurged in the 10th and 11th centuries. So kind of the back and forth of the Byzantine Empire and the continual incursions of the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates saw a steady decline in Asia Minor being controlled by the Christians and a rise in Islam. The conversion of different Turkic peoples would lead to eventually the entire region becoming Muslim and more and more segments of it being conquered and picked off by different Muslim caliphates, sultanates, which are kingdoms and emirates, which were able to kind of unify the Turkish people. However, the greatest of the Turkish tribes and chieftains was a man named Osman. And Osman, in 1299, is able to basically unify all of the various different Turkish peoples to create a principality under the domain of his tribe. And this Turkish tribe is named after him. Osman is the origin of Ottomans. So the Ottoman Turks come from Osman, the founder of the leader of their clan, who basically proved, like in every monarchy, that he was better than everybody else. So therefore his bloodline must be superior, and so people must follow him and do what he says, as well as his descendants, even if his descendants are incompetent. However, Osman would have many successful and powerful descendants, which would bring the Ottoman Empire to glory and power. Now, like every single empire in human history, you have a fledgling period where things are kind of unstable and shaky, and they're not at their best. You are struggling to find your place. You are usually looking up to empires that are superior, stronger, and have a more developed culture and military, and you are waiting for them to decline or to spur on their decline while you also are on the rise. Now, the Ottoman Empire by 1299 had been ravaged by the Muslims for centuries. The Christians in the Fourth Crusade had actually taken over Constantinople and had basically forced the Byzantines out of their own ancient city and capital. But eventually, by the end of that century, the Byzantines had returned, but they were clearly in decline. To the east, you have the Mamluk Sultanate, which was a very, very powerful sultanate. By the way, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. This is our live stream lecture about history and social studies. I am not answering questions right now. I'm just talking about, I'm very happy to have you all here. This is a live stream lecture on the history of the Ottomans, and I am not currently dealing with any topics in the chat, but I probably will be able to address and talk about it later on. So, what else was I going to say? So the Ottomans are dealing with a Byzantine Empire that is weak and collapsing. They are dealing with the Mamelukes in the east. The Mongols have conquered Persia and created the Ilkhanate. So there is a ruling Mongol power based in Persia that was never able to successfully conquer the Middle East. So you don't have the glories of the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties and caliphates, which had challenged the Byzantines for quite some time, but you do have an Asia Minor that doesn't have any fealty to the Byzantine Empire anymore, and so you have a training ground for the creation of Turkey as the power base by which the Ottomans will be able to conquer large segments. Now, the Ottomans are extremely good horse warriors, as the Turks have been throughout much of their history. Cavalry warfare is a huge part of Turkish tribal identity, and the Ottomans are very good at using them, but it is actually the genesis and incorporation of gunpowder into their military in the 15th century that will make them extremely powerful. So throughout the 14th century, Osman's people build up a power base, conquering more and more land in Asia Minor, taking it away from the the floundering Byzantine Empire, while also taking land in the Middle East and slowly growing a power base where they have more and more legitimacy, more and more manpower, more and more resources, and more land. This is what empires tend to do near the end of their fledgling state and the beginning of their risen state. So if you look at it really with an empire, it has a fledgling state where it's just starting out and it's on the rise. This could be seen, if you want to parallel it to the Roman Empire, as the early republican experiment in Rome. You have a founding, you have the kings are overthrown, then you eventually have the creation of the republic. Yes. Well, the Mamelukes got all the way into the Ayyubids, and then the Mamelukes get all the way into the middle of the Middle East. So they're nearby. They're close enough. So what happens next? The Ottomans basically capitalize on the decline of these sultanates, as well as the continual decline of the the Byzantines to become the most powerful force in that area of the world. And their perfection and incorporation of gunpowder makes them really, really good at fighting. This is something that will be their use of gunpowder will basically cancel it, and cannon fire will basically cancel out the Byzantines' continual reliance on Greek fire and other elements to protect themselves and to protect Constantinople, which was an extremely difficult city to defeat at the edge of the land, right on the bay, right at the straits between the Caspian Sea and, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. So Mehmed II, who is known as Mehmed the Conqueror, is a sultan. By the way, the Ottomans had already converted to Islam. They were already Muslim by their advent, so their rulers were known as sultans, kings. And of course, the ruler of the Ottoman Empire will not be called emperor, which is a European term. He will be called the sultan, and this will be a lasting title. So if you want to consider the Ottoman Sultanate, the Sultanate really starts all the way back with Osman when he unifies the tribes in 1299, and it will last all the way until 1922 when the empire is dissolved. So I'm covering 600 years of history in a short amount of time, because I also am going to lecture about the Renaissance. So if you're interested in that topic, please stick around, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already. So the Ottomans, an underrated part of their history is their ability to successfully fight against Muslim foes. And basically, from the ashes of the Mamelukes and the Ayyubids, the Ottomans will be able to conquer almost all of the Middle East and well into North Africa, called the Maghreb by the Muslims. The Ottoman Sultanate, though, its first major enemy that it defeats is indeed the Byzantine Empire. And of course, after a long siege, a young man, he's only 22, Mehmed, is able to lead the Ottomans to victory in Constantinople using cannon fire, basically starving them out. And despite a last strong effort by the Byzantines, the Ottomans are able to overwhelm the city. They pillage and sack the city, a very common thing for conquerors to do. The Christians had done the same thing when they went to Jerusalem centuries before. And now the last shred of the Byzantine Empire is controlled by the Ottomans. This also includes Greece, which is taken over by the Ottomans, creating lasting animosity between Greeks and Turks, because for the next 4 centuries, the Turks will be in charge of the Greeks. For the next century and a half, under amazing sultans like Mehmed, as well as Suleiman the Magnificent and Salim the Great, they will do what they can to take over as much of the Balkans as they can, and they will be extremely successful. Actually, they basically take all of the Balkans. This includes modern countries like Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania. They will encounter opposition from the Hungarians, the Austrian Habsburgs, as well as the Romanians, who are not. Romania does not exist. There are people in different parts of Romania, like Wallachia, but also Transylvania. And here enters one of history's most interesting figures, Vlad Tepes, who is a prince who works with the Hungarians and then against them to fight against the Turks. But the Turks are able to subdue Wallachia, Transylvania, Hungary, these different areas, and consistently challenge the existence of the Austrian Empire ruled by the Habsburgs in the 16th century. So the imperial clash shifts from Byzantine versus Ottoman to Ottoman versus Habsburg. And the Habsburg-Austrian Empire during the early part of the 16th century, this is at the height of the Renaissance, by the way, which is my other topic, is extremely connected. In fact, the destruction of Constantinople spurs on Renaissance learning. So in one way, these two topics are basically one and the same. One is looking at the Asian side or the Middle Eastern side of it, and one is looking at the European side. And when I say Asian, yes, technically speaking, the Middle East is in Asia. What happens next? Christians are often threatened by the presence of the Ottomans. The Ottomans are able to make inroads in the Balkans, which threatens Austria, which threatens Central Europe and the Holy Roman Empire, which means basically all of Germany. They attack Italy often, trying everything they can to capture the Pope, basically to try to delegitimize Christianity by destroying one of its oldest institutions. The Pope eventually forms what's called the Holy League in order to unify different forces, as well as the Habsburgs, against the Ottomans. Interestingly enough, the King of France, Francis I, pairs up with the Ottomans because he wants to weaken the Habsburgs any way he can, because he's surrounded by Habsburgs in the Holy Roman Empire, who also the Habsburgs are ruling over Spain at the time. This is the time of Charles V and the Protestant Reformation, by the way, if you know that history. So this is the early 16th century. What is the Ottoman Empire like? Well, in many ways, we talk about the Pax Romana or even the Pax Britannica, how an empire has this cosmopolitan era of glory and grandeur where things are stable, the empire is wealthy and expanding, trade is frequent, there's a cosmopolitan nature to the cities, there's a decent amount of diversity in the culture. You clearly have a superior culture that discriminates against other cultures that they view as inferior. However, there is an ability for people to live and breathe the way they want to within this society and empire. And the time of the 16th and 17th centuries, particularly under rulers like Suleiman the Magnificent, who is not just a great general, but a great learner, a great scholar, who brings in some of the best and brightest scholars in the Ottoman courts, but also creates a firm political bureaucratic network which will serve the empire well for centuries to come, as well as, of course, being a patron of Ottoman art and Ottoman society and culture. Basically, you have everything coming up aces for the Ottomans. You have a very cosmopolitan, diverse society. So pretty much from the time they take over the Byzantine Empire in 1453 until about the mid-1700s, early 1700s, the Ottoman Empire is dominant. It is powerful, it is a relatively stable society, and it is expanding. It expands into the Balkans, it conquers all of Palestine, as well as large sections of the Middle East, including huge areas of Arabia. By conquering Jerusalem, Medina, and Mecca, it asserts itself as not only the Sultanate of the empire, but it is also considered to be the caliphate, the resurrection of the caliphate, the proper Islamic state. Caliph means follower. It is the correct follower of Muhammad because it controls the three most holy sites of Islam: Mecca, Medina, and of course Jerusalem. So this makes them extremely powerful. They obviously have huge access and a monopoly on the eastern part of the Mediterranean, controlling Asia Minor, Greece, as well as Palestine. They take over Egypt, which is just a huge open door to all sorts of resources and trade with the rest of Africa. They engage heavily in the African slave trade. This is a time when the Europeans are also starting to get involved with it, so they will be competing with the Ottomans and even trying to stop the Ottomans from slave trade for the next 4 centuries. That's something you probably didn't know about, but the British and the French, once they get rid of their slaves in the 19th century, actually send ships around the coast of Africa to stop the Ottomans from enslaving different peoples. The Ottomans basically continued the Arab slave trade that had already pre-existed them, but probably exaggerated. They take over large sections of North Africa. They don't go back to Spain like the Muslims had originally. Spain is now its own independent country, and there's really not much the Muslims can do to try to reconquer it. But they do have a large monopoly on Eastern Mediterranean trade, fishing, all of the things that make an empire successful. The Ottomans have. They have the resources, they have the trade, they have the trade networks. They obviously have contact with the Middle East through the Silk Road, which will allow them to continue to monopolize the trade there and put heavy taxes and fines and burdens on Christians who seek to trade that way, which will send the Christians exploring around the world to try to get to India, China, and Japan. At the same time, the Ottomans will also they monopolize the Silk Road, they monopolize this as a different trade. However, despite their continual animus with the Christians, even in Italy, the Venetians, who are seafarers, who love trade, will do what they can to get on good terms with the Ottomans. Despite sending forces to help the Byzantines defeat them in Constantine XI at the Battle of Constantinople, where Greek fire failed and Ottoman cannon fire proved successful, the Venetians will make a deal where they are basically continued to allow to trade around the Bosporus, in the Black Sea, and in the Eastern Mediterranean with no problem, which basically teaches a valuable economic historical lesson that sometimes people are more willing to trade and seek economic gains and advantages than they are based on religious differences. So money can be more unifying than religion is divisive. Ideas are what makes history go, are the engine that makes history go. And that idea was it's better for us to benefit financially rather than cutting off our own nose to spite our own face by making some sort of religious statement about how much we hate the Ottoman Empire and how much we hate Islam. It doesn't stop the Venetian Catholics from doing this, even while the Ottomans continually attempt to destroy the Roman Catholic Church, to take over the Papal States, and to destroy the papacy. At the same time, what is life like inside the empire? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Ottoman court becomes one of the most well-organized bureaucratic political machines of its time in the 16th and 17th century especially. Comparable in many ways to the way that Confucianism was able to successfully manage Chinese empires, and the more a Chinese empire followed Confucian principles and ethics, the more successful the empire was. The Ottomans, deriving from Islamic law and history, including the Hadiths and Sharia, develop a codified system, a social case system, a social class system, but also a social tolerance system that is extremely important. This will continue to allow Jews, Christians, and other peoples to live in a very large empire. You can't just slaughter your enemies whenever you want, but you can very well try to limit their political effectiveness, their economic achievements, and basically make it clear to them that they are inferior to you in one way or another. Now, this had been done by Muslims before, just like every empire, regardless of religion, does it. Muslims basically forced non-Muslims to pay the jizya. The jizya is a tax that is paid yearly. This will keep Muslims or non-Muslims from fighting in the Islamic army. So basically, if Christians, Jews, or non-Muslims do not want to fight in the Islamic army of the Ottomans, they will pay this tax. Social mobility is only really open for Muslims. Now, economic success, political stability, safety, this is all guaranteed by a very rich empire, be the people that are benefiting Jews or Christians. The safety of the empire's borders, the economic prosperity, the continual expansions into North Africa as well as the Balkans bring in larger and larger groups of people like Sephardic Jews and Balkan Eastern Orthodox Christians that are not, obviously Muslim. And they are not about to convert. Some of them do willingly, some of them do by force. Most of them do not, and the Ottomans, in order to keep their empire running and continue to have an underclass of people, a working class of people, figure the best way to handle these people is not to just destroy them outright, but to make sure that they know that they are second-class citizens unless they convert, and the only way to move up in the world is through that conversion process. In come people like the Janissaries. Now, the real truth of the matter is that Islam, throughout much of its history, had found ways to allow Christians, Jews, and other groups to continue to prosper and find success in their empires, sultanates, and caliphates. the way to do this was usually to convert to Islam. The Janissaries are one of the best examples. They were the principal elite military fighting unit of the Ottoman Empire. And they were really successful. And a lot of them were not originally Muslims. Now, some of them were converts, and some of them were not. But basically, Christian families in the Balkans would sometimes send their sons to basically serve in the courts of the Ottoman emperor. By serving in the courts of the Ottoman emperor, these men would be exposed to learning, they would be educated, many of them would convert to Islam, some of them would become eunuchs. Eunuchs could often rise to high political ranks, including the rank of the Grand Vizier, who was the prime minister and the closest advisor to the Sultan. I'm using the term Sultan and Emperor interchangeably because the Ottomans would have called their ruler the Sultan, like Selim I or Suleiman the Magnificent. So the best way for social mobility was for these Christians to send their children into the Ottoman courts, and in sending them to the Ottoman courts, they would basically officially become Muslim. Some of them would become eunuchs working in the court. There's, of course, this is where we get the stereotype of Islamic kingdoms and courts having these huge harems with lots of women in them. This was a stereotype that comes from the Ottoman Empire, and in order to be around these women, eunuchs were used commonly. And by the way, eunuchs were an ancient concept. They dated back for thousands of years of basically men who helped rulers take care of the women in their stead without, having relations with them or forming relationships with them. So the Ottomans have a very prestigious, very successful court, a political bureaucracy, and the chance for social mobility if Christians and other non-Muslims are willing to convert and embrace Islamic principles and ideas while serving in the court of the king. They can serve as soldiers like the Janissaries, which means often Christian men are sent off to fight against other Christian men in the Balkans, for instance, or they can work in the courts, and some of them can rise to high-ranking political positions within the bureaucracy. As long as the bureaucracy is honest and straightforward and the rulers are good and following principles and ethics, the empire tends to do very well. Just like every other empire, though, this is the period of what you could call, you had a fledgling period, then you have a period of conquest where the empire basically takes up a bunch of land and builds to a enormous amount. Then the third stage is the steady stage, which I like to call the steady stage, where basically the empire is powerful, prosperous. It's not really expanding, but it's not declining. It's not falling apart. Things are good. The idea that you immediately go into entropy if you are not expanding as an empire is untrue. The Romans were at their most prosperous and powerful probably in the 2nd century, and they didn't expand much after Trajan. The Ottomans do the same thing in the 17th century especially. The success of the Holy League in turning back the Ottomans in surprising victories like Lepanto in 1571 and the Knights of Malta, the Knights Hospitaller defeating the Ottomans at Malta in a shocking upset in 1565, basically convinced the Ottomans that while they do want to destroy the Christians, they are not going to continue to try this. The siege of Vienna is foiled in 1586 by King Jan Sobieski. When Poland is on the rise, Hungary eventually gets its independence and freedom. So the Christians are going to draw a line. There's clearly going to be a place where the Ottomans can't go any farther past this. And by the time the 18th century emerges, and even before that, in the 17th century, the Russians are going to be on the rise. The Muscovites and later the Russian Empire are going to, after defeating the Tatars and other groups of people, are going to start attacking the Black Sea. The Ottomans have conquered large sections of the area around the Black Sea, including the Crimea, and the Russians under Tsars Peter the Great and Catherine the Great in the space of an entire century will basically kick the Ottomans out of all of these areas. The 1700s is not a very good time for the Ottoman Empire. The rise of the British Empire as well as the French Empire and the Russian Empire will basically will see a decline in the Ottoman Empire. Empires usually tend to decline as other empires rise. And all of a sudden, the Byzantine Empire, which had to suffer for the Ottomans to become great, the Ottomans are the ones suffering so that the British and Russians can become great. While the Russians take land from the Ottomans, the Dutch did this a little bit before, and the Spanish had tried to do it for a very long time, start taking resources. They capitalize on trade routes. They start basically exploiting relationships. They build better ships. They use better technology. They can and eventually they're able to reach Indian and Chinese and Indonesian ports a lot quicker than the Ottoman land traders were. And so all of a sudden, the market is far more open to the Europeans who've become wealthier, and the Ottomans suddenly have less connections and less available wealth than European empires, which seemingly are starting to outgrow them. This obviously also corresponds with the colonization of Indonesia by the Dutch, who built a huge mercantile empire in the 17th century, and then the British colonization of India, which starts in the 1600s but really gets going in the 1700s. By the way, the Ottomans are one of the three gunpowder empires. How do the Ottomans relate to the other Muslims around them? They can never fully conquer or subdue all of the Arabic peoples, and there will be continual tensions that last between the underclass Arabs and the Ottoman overlords for centuries to come. The Ottomans struggle with various different parts of the Islamic world, and like every single empire, there will be underclasses and people who are wanting to overthrow them and absolutely hate them and feel discriminated and mistreated and oppressed by them throughout their entire existence. This includes the Armenians and the Arabs, as well as the many Sephardic Jews and other peoples. Despite the relative peace, tranquility, and tolerance of the Ottoman Empire, especially compared to other empires of that time, the real truth of the matter is that, as is common with many empires, the underclass still feels the burden of the underclass paying the jizya and clearly being second-class citizens, even with the economic, social, and political opportunities the Ottomans had given many of their people, which was quite impressive for the time. So I'm looking at them in their context of the time, not necessarily by modern standards. And who says modern standards are perfect either? That's the historical sin of presentism, by the way. The Ottomans are dealing with two major other Islamic empires that emerge around the same time. In 1501, the Persians are conquered by Ismail. Ismail is, and by the way, there was also an empire called the Timurid Empire, led by Tamerlane, a descendant of Genghis Khan, who is many of people in Asia are descendants of Genghis Khan. But he basically conquers this large empire and has in Afghanistan. And when his empire collapses, two subsequent empires are founded, one in India called the Mughals, which the Ottomans have some connections with, and then the Safavids. The Safavids will be in Persia. They are led by a man named Ismail, and he converts Persia to 12 Shia Islam. This is huge because the Muslims of the Ottomans are sultanate. The Ottoman Sultanate is a Sunni Muslim empire, whereas Iran is now, or Persia, it's not called Iran yet, is a Shiite Muslim kingdom. This is the reason that Iran is Shiite today. And the Persians and the Safavid Persians and the Ottoman Turks will be fighting for centuries to come, because Muslims on both sides do not consider the other one to be a true Muslim. So there are other powerhouses in the Middle East that are fighting for dominance and control, and the battlefield is in places like modern-day Syria and Iraq, for instance. So we talked about the fledgling stage. We've talked about the stage of growth and expansion, the conquest stage. Then we talked about the steady phase, where everything is good and seems to be going really well, even if the empire isn't expanding at its extent. It's clearly got demarcation points. It can't go any further into Europe. It can't go east. It tries to go south into Africa. It doesn't have a huge success, and it's much more interested in trading with different African peoples than in conquering different African kingdoms. The colonization and economic and political efforts of the Portuguese, British, and French in Africa will dissuade the Ottomans from further land conquest and military campaigns in the south of the Sahara. And by the way, of course, traversing the Sahara in order to send an army into sub-Saharan Africa is extraordinarily difficult. So the Ottomans kind of settle and rest on their laurels. Now, resting on your laurels isn't necessarily a bad thing when your empire is huge, things are successful, and you wake up in a paradise like this every day with the Hagia Sophia being a mosque and you clearly having control from your capital of Constantinople. Not Istanbul. Like I mentioned earlier, it won't be renamed Istanbul until much later. So I might have to do the Renaissance as a separate live stream lecture next week. Because it was a tied vote. You guys people vote on it every week here on YouTube, and it was tied between the Ottomans and the Renaissance, and I'm doing the Ottomans. I thought I would be able to do both, but there's just so much about the Ottomans that I want to talk about that's so interesting and so important to history that I might have to say the Renaissance until next Sunday, although I will be doing a special lecture on Martin Luther King, either that Sunday or that Monday. So please stay tuned for that and come to the Q&As if you want your questions about history answered on Fridays and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. We might have time for Q&A at the end of this one, however. So, and please like and subscribe if you haven't. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate sharing your Sunday with you. What happens next? Let's talk. So we've talked about the rise. We've talked about the conquest. We've talked about the steady phase. And now we've talked about I think some people thought I was done. No, I'm not done. I've got another half hour at least here. And then we talked about the conquest, and we talked about the steady phase. Now we're going to talk about the decline, which is inevitable for empires. I've already kind of hinted at it. The Russians are pick off land over and over again from the Ottomans, eventually seizing the Crimea under Catherine the Great. These long wars against the Russians are extraordinarily costly. The rulers like Selim II or Selim III are not what they used to be. You do not have the grandeur and splendor of the Ottoman Sultanate. And the 1700s are difficult for the Ottomans. And basically, by the end of the 1700s, the British, the French, the Russians, they've all kind of, even the Austrians and Prussians, have kind of outpaced the Ottomans, whereas their glory hasn't receded exceptionally, but they are clearly not what they were before, especially when a new level is unleashed. If the Ottomans had made it to level 7 as successful empires, the Europeans had now unlocked levels 8 and 9. The Russian Empire is the largest in the world. It's continuing to expand and will do so throughout the 1800s at the expense of the Ottomans in several wars, with one major exception that I'll talk about in a minute. The British have created the large navy. They have become the trading powerhouse, so the Ottomans' monopoly over the eastern Mediterranean seafaring doesn't seem quite as interesting as the growing Pax Britannica, with Britain's trade routes going all the way to places like Australia and, of course, China and India, and their continual growth and interest in India and their seizing of areas like Hong Kong will only make things worse. So it's not that the Ottomans are taking hits, it's that the Ottomans are stagnating while the Europeans are growing. The 1800s is when the Europeans basically decide to start taking hits on the Ottomans. This is also combined with the rising tide of nationalism, which, interestingly enough, despite being a European concept that's bred out of the Enlightenment of the 18th century, is also and is made worse by Napoleon's invasions after the French Revolution of different countries, including the Ottoman Empire. By the way, Napoleon fought against the Ottomans, a very famous invasion of the Ottoman Empire. This led to the famous Battle of the Pyramids in 1799. But for 4 years, Napoleon, seeking to attack British colonies in India, attacked the Ottomans, and for once the Ottomans and the British put aside their differences and fought against him. Napoleon was somewhat successful, but it really just showed that the Ottomans were kind of vulnerable. If Napoleon could get this far into their territory and attacking North Africa, the Ottomans were not what they used to be. Napoleon's rise and fall brings about nationalism. Nationalism becomes a huge and popular idea amongst the Europeans, particularly in the Balkans. This nationalism also seems to have caught on, despite no association with the European Enlightenment, in Islamic countries like Egypt, which will fight for their independence under a man named Muhammad Ali. Yes, the original Muhammad Ali was not a boxer. He was a prince who fought for Egyptian freedom in the middle of the 19th century and basically forced the Ottomans to accept a semi-autonomous free Egypt. This also means the slow but steady breaking down of Ottoman control of areas like Tunisia. In the 1850s or 1840s, the French will show up and take Algeria as they start to build an empire. And by the end of the 19th century, the Europeans will control almost all of Africa, and the Ottomans will have lost basically everything that they did have in Africa, with countries like Italy and France taking over former Ottoman territories like Tunisia, Libya, and of course, like I mentioned, Algeria, which becomes a huge part of French West Africa. So this painting, by the way, I love it because, of course, I love anything about Napoleon. I could talk about him for days. But look at the trampling down of the Ottomans. Look at how helpless they look. This is very much, if you want to look at a picture of the Ottomans in the 19th century, this is what they look like, and this is what the Russians will call them. This is why the Russians will call them the sick man of Europe, and this will become a popular phrase. In the 1820s, the Greeks started revolution. After 10 years, they're able to gain their independence. The Bulgarians and Romanians come soon afterwards. The Russians are very quick to help them with this. Several wars against the Russians and Tsar Nicholas I are as well as Alexander I, the same guy who defeats Napoleon, interestingly enough, proved to be big embarrassments for the Ottomans. The Ottomans have one major last victory against the Russians, and it's only because the French and the British, worried about the Russians becoming too powerful in the Balkans, decide to limit the power of the Russians by aiding the Ottomans in the Crimean War. The Ottomans and the Russians are surprised by this because Catholics and Protestants are now fighting with Muslims against Eastern Orthodox Christians. This is surprising to Nicholas I, who is devastated, and with huge defeats at places like Sevastopol, the Russians, basically, their power is broken. They're exposed for being weaker than they thought they were, and the Ottomans are given a reprieve by the British and the French. But make no mistake, they probably would have been smashed by the Russians had the French and British not shown up. The Ottomans are industrializing, but at a much slower pace than the Europeans. Their resources, their economy is weaker. They do not have as many provinces. During a collapsing stage of an empire, as you're losing provinces, you're losing manpower, you're losing resources, you're losing the ability to create new technology and to keep up with the empires that are rising around you. What makes maybe the Western Roman Empire's collapse so interesting is that it's not at the hands of another empire, but of course through its own political fault. But the Ottomans is clearly at the hands of other empires that are sucking up all of the resources and power in Africa and in other regions. Now, the Ottomans aren't just sitting around just taking this. They're watching this, and there are huge efforts. There are reform efforts. There are efforts at liberalization. Even constitutional monarchy is proposed and eventually adopted, I think in 1908. A group of Turks seeking to radicalize the empire and basically make it into a democracy called the Young Turks. That's where that name comes from for that political organization. Try to stage a political revolution in the early 20th century. The sultans start to give up some more of their power to try to replenish the bureaucracy and create representative government that will be more favorable to the people of the Ottoman Empire. But by this point, the Ottoman Empire is not what it was. It controls the Middle East, large sections of the Middle East, Arabia, Palestine, Lebanon, as well as Asia Minor, and of course the city of Constantinople. But the Greeks are independent, the Bulgarians are independent, the Bosnians and Herzegovinians gained their independence. These wars are very costly and brutal. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, which has emerged as the dominant force in the Balkans, as the Austrians have now overtaken the Turks, will try to administer and control the affairs of the region. And this is what we see in 1914 when Franz Ferdinand is killed by a Serbian nationalist in Bosnia, which had been taken by the Austro-Hungarians. Interestingly enough, that entire story does not include the Ottomans. One of the most fascinating stories in all of history, the start of a Second World War, what you call the First World War, what I consider to be the Second World War, the Great War, does not include the Ottomans, who had been dominant in that land just a century and a half before. Now their power is broken. It's really about the Austro-Hungarians doing what they want along with the Germans. However, the Turks are still fighting. There were the two Balkan Wars before this where the Turks had tried to reclaim different areas of land. And the Ottomans see an opportunity here. So surprisingly, they ally with the Bulgarians and with the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans in joining the war at the end of 1914, beginning of 1915. And so the Ottomans fight in the World War. The Russians, fighting against the Russians and undermining them is a huge reason for doing this. And they also hope that they can weaken Britain's control in northern Africa. Maybe they can reclaim parts of Egypt if they do this, which obviously means a lot of resources and cultural brownie points, which the Ottomans would really, really love to have at this point. But yes, they are cascading. The world is cascading into a world war. This is, in my opinion, again, the Second World War. You may consider it the First World War. I'm going to call it the Second World War for the rest of the time. If you have any questions as to why, refer to the fact that I think the 7 Years' War is the First World War. And if I'm correct, the Ottomans do not fight in the 7 Years' War, or the First World War, but they certainly fight in the Second World War. By the way, Turkey does not fight in the Third World War, or what you call the Second World War. So that I'm not confusing anybody, let's get back to talking about I'll also call it the Great War, just to get rid of any sort of confusion. And if I can't see the chat right now, it's because I'm looking for a good, appropriate background that sums up the war. This war is going to change history in so many ways that the more I think about this war, the more I think as consequential as the last World War was. I'm always going to say it's more consequential, but this war is really close in its impact and its legacy in the development of world history. And you can't have the development of world history without this war. You can't have the modern world without this war. And it is the war where empires go to die, and the Ottomans will be no different. The Ottomans are not prepared to fight in this war. They are fighting in this war as a way to gain back some of their glory and respect, and also to gain back some land in the Balkans. If they can split it with the Austro-Hungarians and the Bulgarians, they'll be very happy about that. This seems like a slam dunk for them. They are able to attack the Greeks and have some successes against them. A young British naval, the Lord of the Admiralty, a man by the name of Winston Churchill, perhaps you heard of him, launches this horrendously badly managed campaign that actually is really good in principle, but turns out to be a disaster because the best laid plans of mice and men often fail. often go awry, and the Ottomans are given a reprieve and a little bit of glory by winning the Gallipoli campaign against the British and the Greeks. However, the invasion of Greece by the Bulgarians and the Turks will go extremely unsuccessfully, with the British and the French sending troops to help them there. In 1916, the British basically decide that they are going to play God in the Middle East and take away and really, really kick the Ottomans to the curb. They will create a military force out of Arabian rebels, sending officers and military equipment and support, including a man named T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, to help the Arabs and the Palestinians overthrow the Muslim Turks. And in the oppression of these groups by the Ottoman Sultanate, the Turks are not Middle Easterner in the sense of they are not Arabs. I don't believe they're Semitic. By the way, if you want to see the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, this is a depiction of the siege of Constantinople in 1453. Those catapults depict Greek fire, and of course, if you look closely, you can see the amazing cannons, the very large, heavy cannons that the Ottomans were able to carry into battle on many occasions. So, still looking for a nice background for the Great War. Let me see here. So, the British basically use the discomfort and frustration of various groups of Middle Eastern people to help them overthrow the Ottomans, and this is where we want to be. The Ottomans do not do well during the war, despite them working in every capacity they can to regain their glory. They are humiliated. The Russians sweep through the Transcaucasus region, seeking as they had done in previous decades, seeking to get into Ottoman territory quite quickly. This leads to one of the most tragic and awful events in human history that nobody talks about enough as much as they should. If you talk about the 20th century, one word comes to mind in a historical context that happens more often than other things, and that is the word genocide. The Ottoman Turks perpetuate the first, in my opinion, although you could argue that the Americans do it in the Philippines, but I think it's a little bit more cut and dry here. The Ottomans perpetuate the first major genocide of a population in the 20th century. This is the genocide of the Armenian people, which also includes what's called the Christian genocide of various Christian groups that had been in the empire, and also of the Assyrians. I'm going to take a quick sip of coffee while you hopefully like and subscribe. Hope you're all having a great time. But basically, the Ottomans basically decide that these Christian minorities have been oppressed for quite some time. The Armenians have been particularly bristly for their independence. The Turks fear that they will link up with the Russian army in the east and basically overthrow the Ottomans and cause even more chaos. So they believe it is time to relocate these people and basically try to, in a quick rush, throw them out of their homes and send them into the Syrian desert, where they'll be safe from from the Russian invasion. Which means that the Ottomans will be safe from the Armenians and Russians joining forces and toppling the empire. They send them into the Syrian desert with very little warning, without proper food or nourishment, basically not caring if these people have enough to eat or have proper protection from the elements. The exposure is quite awful. Armenians and other Assyrians, yes, it's ancient Assyrian people, and Christians who are not able to who refuse to go are often brutalized, their women are abused, and their men are killed, and the rest are forced southward in huge numbers, where many of them die along the way because they do not have proper access to resources. The Ottoman Empire purposefully prevents them from getting the resources they need, and about 1.5 million to 2 million people die, and the Turkish government is only recently coming to grips with this and realizing that, yeah, this probably did happen, and yeah, we were responsible for it after nearly a century of denial. The Germans quickly acknowledged the Holocaust. The Russians have acknowledged the Holodomor. The Pol Pot's government was overthrown for the killing fields. It took a century for the Turks to come around to what the brutality of the Ottomans in 1914 to 1916 and what they did to the Armenians and to other people. So, what happens next? Hold on one second. I'm going to change my lighting just a little bit. Okay, hopefully that's better for my lighting. I had it over there, and I just decided to move it a little bit closer here, so it's easier for me to see me. The Ottomans also, the Islamic The Arabic Revolution, which, by the way, the flag is the Palestinian flag. That's where the Palestinian flag comes from. Is very successful in ruining Islamic control of the or Ottoman control of the Levant as well as Arabia. The empire is basically kind of falling apart on its own during the war. The British make incursions into the Levant that are successful, and of course the Russians are not stopped in the east. The efforts against the Greeks are not successful, and by the end of the war, the Ottoman Empire is in tatters. Now, the Peace of Paris brings with it many different treaties, like Trianon and Versailles. I'm trying to remember the name for the one with the Turks, but basically this comes with basically the dissolution of any Ottoman control of any of the regions. By the way, these are the Arabic rebels. These are the kinds of people that T. Lawrence was running around with. This is what you've seen if you've seen the famous movie about him or read his book, his memoir on the encounter. And of course, here are the Armenian people who are displaced, and many of them die in huge numbers. These horrible crimes against humanity are not visited on the Ottomans as much as they probably should be because of the European hyper-focus on their own problems with the Germans in particular, which will lead to a bunch of other problems, and also dissolving the empires. The punishment for the Ottomans is that they lose everything. Their empire isn't dissolved immediately, but is basically made a weakened shell of its former self, and the empire is extremely small, basically constrained to Asia Minor, and eventually the Turks themselves think that this is not acceptable, so they stage a revolution and redo the treaty. I think it's the Treaty of Trianon. Maybe it is Trianon. They redo the treaty after overthrowing the Ottoman Sultan and creating the Republic of Turkey. A man named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk creates an independent Turkish government that basically becomes the Turkish Republic, that is the government of Turkey more or less today. And he gets a better deal than the Ottomans had with than they had before. So the Ottoman Empire is dissolved in about 1922, 1923. I'm trying to remember the name of the last sultan. They have lost everything. By the way, their control over Arabia, all the Muslim holy sites, and the Levant is gone. The British had made sure of that. And the British and the French will re-administer the Middle East in their new image with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The empire was dead before then, before Ataturk dissolved it, and the empire was dying throughout much of the 19th century. And now we've talked about the decline period of the Ottoman Empire. However, its legacy is undeniable. At its height, the empire was huge, it was powerful, it was glorious, it was one of the largest land empires that history had ever seen before. It controlled large swathes of North Africa, most of the Middle East, huge portions of Eastern and Southern and even parts of Central Europe, and all the way up into the Transcaucasus regions and the Black Sea, going into modern-day Ukraine in the north, all the way down to Ethiopia in the south and areas around there where they had tried to get to. Excuse me. So if there is ever a quintessential Muslim empire with its cosmopolitan nature, diversity, tolerance, yet also strict commitments to Islam as they see themselves as the successor of Muhammad, perhaps the archetype for that is the Ottoman Empire, which created a pretty cosmopolitan and diverse society, but was also very, very, very acute, made everyone very acutely aware that they, as Sunni Muslims, were at the top, and that Turks, as an ethnic group, were at the top compared to even other Muslim groups like Arabs and Palestinians. It's also the Ottomans also have large numbers of Jews and Christians within their empire, as well as a bunch of different other people. Zionism and the resettlement of that region, whatever, we're not going to go into that right now. That starts under the Ottomans. Their legacy is quite interesting. Their ability to use siege warfare was unrivaled for the time. And really, the true story and the real moral of the story of the Ottoman Empire is the Ottoman Empire didn't really fall apart because of a huge collapse and a huge smashing conquest from someone else like they had done to the Byzantines. To be fair, the Byzantines were already in decline. The Ottoman Empire declined because everybody else sped up. The Russians, the Brits, and the French especially basically put the Ottoman Empire to shame. This isn't to say that political corruption, bad economic policy, difficulties between different ethnic and religious groups, those all clearly have a part to play. To look at the disgrace brought upon the empire by their actions against the Armenians and by the Arabic revolts during the Great War. the Great War was really just the death nail in a coffin that had already been laid out for the Ottomans and that the Europeans had been trying to stuff them into throughout much of the 19th century. But in many ways, it had been kind of a sure thing that ever since the Europeans had become the more dominant empires, starting in the 18th century, the Ottomans were just going to kind of fizzle out. And fizzle out they did. The Ottoman Empire did not end with a bang, but with a whimper. But the bangs that came before it were very, very loud. Well, I hope. Oh, by the way, it's the Turkish Republic that renames Constantinople Istanbul. The Ottomans called it Constantinople, but they did take the Hagia Sophia and turn it into a mosque. So, I hope you enjoyed this live stream lecture on the Ottoman Empire. I am not going to get to the Renaissance. We're at 53 minutes, so I went 50 minutes, basically, more or less, talking about the Ottomans. There's just so much amazing history there. There's probably stuff I definitely left out and had to go by. But the top, I guess, next weekend's live stream lecture is set. It will be the Renaissance, and that is a topic I've lectured on before, but I'm looking forward to revisiting. And I actually used to be against revisiting topics for a live stream lecture in order to do new topics. But the truth of the matter is, the more I learn, the more I want to say. And so I have a lot to say about the Ottomans, and I have a lot to say about the Renaissance next Sunday. So please join us at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'm not done. I'm going to take about 15 minutes and answer any questions you have about history or social studies. Please hit the like and subscribe if you haven't. Double tap the screen and all of that great stuff. We have long-form and short-form content available on this channel, as well as plenty of live streams. You can go and watch me interact and answer questions. We also have TikTok, Patreon, and Substack for all of you who are interested in that. And I saw Hars earlier. He's probably celebrating the Bills winning, which really was just a stroke of luck, I guess. But if he could put those social media handles in the chat, that would be very, very appreciative. And I don't know why, but we've decided to talk about Islam at great length. Maybe it's because I was talking about the Ottomans in the chat. So I'm going to look through the chat, but if you have questions, drop them in the chat. Drop a comment or topic or question you would like, or a suggestion or feedback. If you want a longer discourse with me, you can join our Discord. Literally, to have a discourse, join our Discord. You can also email me, friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. Simple stuff there. Let me see what we've got in the chat, and I will try to catch up. Rules that control people, religion is a way in which people used to get power. So people are just arguing about religion. Ethagog, only with blood of Abraham are chosen ones today, Jews from Israel, just mongrels, synagogue of devil, nothing to do with God. Oh, for goodness sakes. We can't go one of these. Can we go one of these live streams without nonsensical anti-Semitism and anti-Islamic nonsense too? Do you use your knowledge of history to talk about what you think is going on today? Blue Sky was asking. Greenland, Venezuela, Alberta, and Canada. Absolutely. We can't understand anything that's going on in our world today without our proper conception of the history around it. So I absolutely use history all the time as my guiding rod, as my lightning rod on what's happening in political and geopolitical issues. In fact, I don't talk about those issues on this channel aside from a historical analysis of them, and I rarely ever give my opinion on them. I try to be as objective as I can about politics and religion. I also do a daily news update because I think the news is extraordinarily manipulated and not there to tell you the truth, just to tell you how to think, not to tell you what to think, not how to think. My job is to tell the truth, because that's what all historians do. Anyone who studies or practices history is a historian, so you are a historian. If you want to become a Friendly Neighborhood historian unofficially, you can like and subscribe. And if you want to become an official Friendly Neighborhood historian, you can become a member or give a super chat, which is very supportive. All of the money that is used for this channel goes into improving the tech and the gear, like my lighting, my microphone. All of it was bought because of money I got from this channel. And yes, the war was to win. World War II was the war to end all wars, or the Great War. Let me see here. How many Palestinian children have to be killed before you will acknowledge the genocide? That's a leading question. That's just loaded. That's like leading and loaded at the same time. I don't think that it's good that anyone dies. And I don't think that war is ever good in the sense of good things are happening and you can celebrate people dying. I think there's a difference between war and genocide. And I think the Ottomans fighting against the Islamic rebels in the Levant is war. The relocating people without resources and basically starving them in the desert, that's genocide. These things have tiers. There's nuance to them. We're going to use such heavy terms. We might as well add meaning. We want to, in this postmodern world, just destroy all meaning to words. So therefore, a word like racism can mean anything, or a word like genocide can mean anything. So no, I'm not going to acknowledge it, genocide just because of a number of people. I usually also would say that if you're going to talk about genocide in a serious context, it's usually going to be in the seven figures. I'm sorry, but what stopped the Mughals from conquering the entire Indian subcontinent? They got very close, but it was eventually their own political infighting, the creation of the Maratha Confederacy, and the arrival of the British and the French, where they basically pit the different Rajas against each other. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, the Mughal were in their own decline that kind of made it clear that they were too politically fractured to actually survive. Yes, some hadiths were written 200 years after the Prophet. Yes, there are a lot of Islamic writings that come centuries after, even the most liberal generosity to Muslim scholarship, which basically will say accept all Muslim arguments. Even Muslim scholars say that these writings come hundreds of years after Muhammad. So those dates themselves should be taken with a grain of salt. Whereas it's very possible that these were written 500 years, 400 years. That's a more skeptical approach to it. Let me see. So there are almost no Christians? Well, when I say Christians, it was a particular group of different peoples in the region who were identified as Christians that were killed off by the Ottomans. So, let me see here. Hello, friendly neighborhood historian. Well, I'm not the friendly neighborhood historian. I'm friendly neighborhood history or history Hefner. By the way, this smoking jacket, little bit of Ottoman history. Turkish tobacco was a gift the Ottomans gave the British for helping them fight the war. The British developed in their textile mills at the height of the Industrial Revolution. You can watch my video on the Industrial Revolution if you want. Smoking jackets for officers to wear so that they don't get the smell and the dirt all over them when they are smoking pipe tobacco. Also, international organizations have agreed the Gaza genocide. I don't care what international organizations say. I really don't. Some of them, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter. I'm saying that they can be wrong. International organizations have been wrong before and can be wrong again. I'm going to disagree with them. It's one of these things where, well, don't you feel the pressure to accept what international organizations say at international law? No. I'm going to look at it from a historical lens. International organizations have been wrong. If UNRWA can do the dirty work of Hamas in Gaza, then international organizations can be wrong. Sorry. I don't just believe something because an organization tells me to believe it. Let me see. Hello. Oh, Wild and Fresh is here. We've got one of our moderators. I don't know if Harry and Hars are here. If you are, please say hi in the chat. Unharik has said Gaza genocide is real. International Association of Genocide Scholars have said it is a genocide. It has every check box in the book. No, it doesn't. It has a bunch of organizations that say that it's happening when I don't think that it's happening. So what's a genocide? Genocide is the concentrated effort to destroy an entire people group. That's what a genocide is. It's the murder, the killing off, usually very hugely successful, of an entire group. And by the way, people were saying the Gazan genocide was happening long before October 7th. Long before this war ever started, they were saying there was a Gazan genocide despite a huge growth in the population of Gaza in the last 20 years. No, it's not true. It's not. I've answered this. I've talked about this ad nauseum on the channel. Yes, what you have is awful. It's tragic. It's hard to watch. It needs to stop. That's bad. That's obviously very bad. There is no systematic effort by the Israeli military and government to destroy all of the Palestinians in Gaza. There are some people who want that. There are some people who hope for that, who fight for that. But I don't see a systematic effort at genocide by the Israelis. What I do see is a war in a very small strip of land, as I have talked about constantly, where if you look at it historically in proportionality, but it's very, very hard to avoid any civilian casualties. Israel has actually done better at avoiding civilian casualties than the U.S. did in Afghanistan, and certainly than the British did at Dresden. Are those genocides? Was the U.S. war in Afghanistan a genocide of the Afghan people? Did they genocide the Iraqis? If this can be a genocide, why can't Nagasaki be a genocide? Failure to be proportional about these issues is part of the problem. Free Palestine from who? They have created conditions to destroy the group wholly or partly. In war, you create conditions that destroy people. That's just part of what war is. Is that always a genocide? No. Is it sometimes a genocide? Yes. Look at what the Ottomans did to the Armenians. That was done in warfare. Genocides can happen in and out of war. But it's not happening in Gaza. I'm sorry. You've got a population that, by proportion, by proportion to what is happening, compare the amount of people gained in the last 20 years in the population of Gaza when it's been called a genocide and a concentration camp and an apartheid state. The growth of the population has been exponential and far outweighs the loss of population from the war, even by the most heavy of estimates. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yes, nuance and logic, wild. Does this mean that I think that everything Israel has done in Gaza is good? No. Do I think that destroying hospitals is good? No. Should that have been avoided? Probably. Do I also understand that on the other hand, you have hospitals with the tunnel system underneath them, an intricate system of tunnels with aid that was given, international aid, millions of dollars by all of these countries, all of these international organizations that are so proudly saying this is a genocide, sent millions of dollars and got taxpayer dollars from dozens of countries sent to the Gazans that Hamas used to build an underground system of tunnels to hide hostages and their own militants, while their own party members hang out in Qatar and get rich. I'm sorry, that's just factual. So people complain about Netanyahu sending money to Hamas. Nobody complains about how much money the international community gave Hamas that Hamas immediately used for terrorist activity and for militancy, not to help the people of Gaza. And yet Israel is blamed. It doesn't make any sense. You're not allowed to ask questions about it because people don't care what you think. But, I mean, it's obvious. So, they have been ethnic cleansing for decades and are occupying more land in the West Bank. Yes, a country taking land from another country is ethnic cleansing. That is such a narrow definition. It is so ridiculously untrue. Gaza was not controlled by the Israelis until 1967. Before then, it wasn't controlled by the Palestinians. The Palestinians never controlled the Golan Heights or the West Bank, for instance. These lands were given to them by the Israelis eventually after they were taken from other Arabic countries that had controlled them as a way to oversee the Palestinians while screwing them over like the Jordanians did, and also trying to destroy Israel. So there's that too. So I'm sorry, but that doesn't work. Can I change the subject from Gaza to Venezuela? I'd like to talk about history. I wanted to do 15, 20 minutes of questions about history and social studies, and I'd be more than willing to do that. So, Bibi says it's not a genocide, so it's not according to him. The genocide experts say so, but what do they know, apologist? Yeah, yes, I totally, did I quote Benjamin Netanyahu? Did I say, oh, the Jews were there thousands of years ago, so therefore they deserve a land? Did I make any of those stupid little entry-level arguments? No. I made a more nuanced one than that. I don't need anyone to tell me it is or isn't a genocide. I can look at it myself. And part of the reason that we're so quick to rush in to say that it's a genocide is technology. The access to social media, the access to video, the access to television tape of all of us makes it a lot easier for us to say, this is bad, this is a genocide, this is this, this is that. We didn't do that in other wars because we didn't have that access. So take the access through social media, the television, and the internet that we have to this war and apply it to all other wars in the past, you would probably be saying all of them are genocides. Which you could say that if you want to basically strip the term of all of its meaning and just replace the word war with genocide, but it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Nagasaki and Hiroshima was absolutely a genocide committed by the U.S. movement. See, this is where we're going with this. Everything is a genocide, or nothing is a genocide. Or some things are genocides, and other things aren't genocides. And if you want to use such a powerful, loaded term, you have to be specific. And by the way, you can say other bad words about what's happening without saying genocide. You could say war crimes. You could say ethnic cleansing. You can say atrocities. You can say humanitarian crises created by the Israeli military. You could say all of that, and some of those I happen to agree with. But I'm not going to just sacrifice this pedestal of genocide because you watch something on TikTok and now think you know more than everyone else does. Yeah, the ICJ is entertaining the case. Well, they can entertain anything they want. What do I care what they entertain? Who says I have to follow what the ICJ says? International communities do not make incorrect decisions. UNRWA was basically manipulated and controlled and influenced by Hamas operatives throughout, before, during, and after the October 7th war. Yes. Countries sent flotillas, they sent plenty of supplies, and a lot of humanitarian aid got in. Some of it was stolen, and guess who stole it? Bandits, brigands, sometimes the IDF, and sometimes Hamas. Nuance. Yes, the IDF literally took advantage of Palestinian prisoners. Yes, of course they did. That happens, and I'm sorry, that's a horrible thing, and I don't like that. But Matt Smith, that happens in every war. Every single war. And if you think the United States hasn't done it, you're loco. But you seem to hate the United States too, so I don't even know what standard. What standard are we going by to fight a perfect war? Or can we just not fight wars anymore? I'm sorry, but that's completely impossible. You have to be completely ignorant of history. The Locarno Pact, the Kellogg-Briand Treaty, they banned war. 10 years later, a guy with a mustache shows up and boom, world war. You can't fight wars by these standards. It's impossible when you try to add these contexts that, ooh, this is so immoral. Yes, it is immoral. Almost all of war is immoral. Plato was talking about this centuries before Christ was born. Grow up. We all know it. Anyone who literally thinks about these things critically will realize that war is almost always immoral in many of its aspects, and that immoral actions are done by individuals. Individuals doing immoral actions during war is not the same thing as a government sanctioning the destruction of an entire people. There is a huge difference between a soldier fighting in Germany in 1945 for the Americans, finding a woman and taking advantage of her, than the Chinese deciding that they will brutalize the city of Nanjing as part of their military campaign there by abusing women to the point where they are dying. Those are war crimes. Both are war crimes. One is systematic, one is incidental. You have one guy doing something awful and shameful, and you have an entire system trying to do it. So, yes, I understand that you don't understand how that works, but yes. How much do you get paid to lie for Israel? What lies have I told? Nobody can tell me any of the things I'm saying are lies. They just bring up other facts and whataboutism. I'm not getting paid anything by Israel. Do you think if I was getting paid by Israel, I'd be talking about the Ottomans? I'd be talking about Israel, great, Israel this, Israel that. I don't even say that. I criticize Israel plenty. Israel's done terrible things. Lavon affair. The USS Liberty. Look at what's happening in the West Bank. The settlement movement. The ultra-Orthodox in Israel. The ultra-conservatives. They are loonies. Well, I have a question. Cutting of Gaza and sanctioning them so they starve to death could be genocide. That could be, yes, if that was what was happening. That is not what's happening, but yes, yeah. Did Israel exist before 1948? Yes. Did Palestine exist? Yes. I love this argument. So you can't win the argument about Gaza and what's happening now, so you go back to 1948. So let's go to the history. Well, I prefer that because I'm a historian, but let's go back to 1948. Yes, Israel didn't technically exist. The Israelis who lived there were called Palestinians. I'm very well aware of all of this. By the way, it's the Jordanians and the Hashemites who are responsible for the Palestinians not having a state. It's the Egyptians who are responsible. When Israel said, we are fighting a war against them because they are fighting a war against us and want us destroyed, we're going to bomb this city called Rafah. The Egyptians closed their border to not let the Palestinians in because they're worried about them overthrowing their government. If you look at the story, yes, Israel's done horrible things to the Palestinians over and over again. And that often happens in the context of constant warfare, especially between people who live together in this very small little shrimpy country. But it's also the larger Muslim countries that have done horrible things to the Palestinians or let it happen to them and say, oh, we don't know, that's just the Israelis. The Israelis are bad. And it makes sense because the most popular book that you can find in Egypt often is Mein Kampf. So let's talk about the history. Let's talk about how none of the Palestinians didn't have anything to do with those wars, at least not ostensibly. The countries that fought against Israel in those wars were Jordan, Egypt, Syria. The Palestinians have not had a home or a proper country because of the Israelis, but also because of the other Arabs and Semitic peoples in the land who hate them, who are using them to attack Israel. I'm sorry, I know you don't know that, but yeah. Palestine existed before 1948. That was the region that it was called. In 136 AD, at the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt, Hadrian renamed the country, the province, Syria-Palestina, in order to mock the Jews who had been revolting. Before then, it was called Judea, the land of the Jews, the Hebrews. Oh, it goes back to the kingdom of David, the kingdom of Israel. I don't make the argument that because a country had this area a long time ago, even as a historian, therefore they deserve this land right now, because that doesn't make any sense. History is full of changes and alterations, and people change, and land changes hands. It's just the fact of nature. The Native Americans don't have their land anymore. I'm living on that land. I live in the United States, so there you go. So yes, Palestine existed. Before that, Israel existed. Now, I love it when I bring this up to people that say, well, that's just ancient history, so who cares? Well, you brought up history. You brought up 1948, so I'm talking about before 1948. I'm saying if you go back to 1948 BC, you're a lot closer to the Jews being in that land than the Arabs. And by the way, or the Palestinians for that matter. And by the way, there was no Islam when the first temple was destroyed, the second temple was built, or the second temple was destroyed, or Bar Kokhba, or when the land was named Palestine. There were Jews who lived in that land all throughout history, by the way. Yeah. Let me see. October 7th was convenient for Bibi to stay in power. That's true. I'm not saying anything good about Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, so did you know that the symbol of the crescent moon, which has become the symbol of Islam, was associated with the religion because of the Ottoman flag? Yes. Also, did you know the symbol was originated in ancient Persia? Yes. This is where the ancient theory that Allah is the moon god comes from, which I don't think is historically accurate to what a Muslim would say. But yes, the crescent moon being associated with Islam comes from the Ottomans establishing the caliphate during their empire. You're so close to the point, you've almost got it. Yeah. They're stealing land in the West Bank with no Hamas. The Greater Israel Project is real. Do you know that the Palestinian Authority has basically promised that the only land they will accept is one Palestinian state with no Jews in it? They won't even accept a government that is ruled by Palestine with Jews in it. They don't want Jews in that land. What does that mean? Ethnic cleansing, genocide, these things you are throwing around. So you can talk about the West Bank and make it like this nice, peaceful area. It isn't. And no, that doesn't mean the Israelis have a right to go in and take land from there. And yes, there are plenty of Israelis who believe in this Greater Israel Project. Oh, wow. Nationalists who want to expand and take land. We've never seen that in the United States or Britain or France or, amongst the Muslims. Islam is an expansionist religion. I just love this. The Israelis are held to a standard that no other country is held to in the world, and no other country ever has been. No, nowhere. I'm sorry. It just is. It's ridiculous to me as a historian. Just because I know so much of history, I know we don't look at other countries and say, well, Japan wanting to expand into Korea, ooh, that's genocide. That's ethnic cleansing. No, it's war. It's conquest. It's imperialism. It's existed for thousands of years. When did we reach this presentism where we have this moral standard that's better than all other moral standards? What is the standard, by the way? I'm just wondering what the standard is. Things do not stay the same forever. So, Tyrone, the truth of the matter is it right for Israel to go in and take land in the West Bank? No, it's certainly wrong. I don't like it. But do the Palestinians in the West Bank envision a land where they have a country and the Israelis have a country? Generally not. Some do. A lot don't. The people in power certainly don't, like Mahmoud Abbas, one of the most corrupt people in the world, just like Netanyahu. Everyone will talk about how corrupt Netanyahu is, and I'm sure it's very true, but nobody will talk about Abbas or the Palestinian children of these leaders who are living in Qatar. You don't know that because you either listen to Tucker Carlson or you listen to left-wing media. But there's two sides to this story. The right and the left are both completely out to lunch on this. Let me see. Hello, Jack. Welcome. UN Watch keep exposing the UN. The UN isn't as objective as they think. By the way, there'd be no UN without the United States. I just did a video on this. The League of Nations was a disaster. It was a disaster because it didn't have the backing of the United States. So the UN will eventually answer to the United States. That's the ultimate truth. I know you don't like that, but it's true. What are the difference between the Seljuks and the Ottomans? Great question, Tony. So the Seljuks, there's various different, this is where I started the live stream, but there's various different Turkic tribes. The Turks were not like Germans, they weren't a nation so much as they were a people. And so there's various different groups of Germans, like Bavarians and Austrians and Prussians, but although the Austrians are kind of their own thing at this point, but there are various different types of Turks, like the Seljuks, who are the first ones to really unify Asia Minor into a country that becomes the Sultanate of the Seljuks, who are able to conquer the Holy Land. I don't think they conquer Mecca. I don't think they create a caliphate, and they're the ones that the Crusaders go to war with in 1095 and take Jerusalem. The Ottomans are another group that is founded by Osman that creates the empire that I just talked about in the lecture. And if you want to learn more about the Ottoman Empire through one of my longer videos, watch the one on the Armenian genocide, where I go into detail about the horrible suffering of the Armenian people, which is actually a genocide. And yes, and by the way, that doesn't mean the Gazans aren't suffering. People can suffer without being in a genocide. I know that the genocide is the key word because it's a buzzword, because it all of a sudden connotates all these meanings, and we can accuse the same country, the same people that suffered one of the worst genocides in history of doing a genocide, and won't that be kind of ironic? But no. Might is right. Always has been, always will be. The losers are constantly crying. Might is still right, is not right morally, but when have people cared about morals, is what I'm saying. You have to look at this from a historical lens of modern warfare, modern civilizations have created standards of moral warfare that only somewhat existed in previous centuries and areas of the world. Sacking a city like Constantinople was sacked, or Jerusalem was sacked by the Crusaders, and killing men and abusing women was the norm. Okay, now there were certain standards of moral decency during warfare that were followed, but the inventions of the Industrial Revolution, which were mass killing machines, basically necessitated the need to moralize war. But there's gotten to a point where it's like you can't fight war anymore. And every war causes genocide. Every war causes devastation. Yes, every war causes devastation. Why are you saying this like it's some sort of incredible discovery? Read Sun Tzu, read Plato, read Muhammad, read Buddha, read Christ, read every single moralistic figure in human history, and you will find that they have very similar attitudes about war. War is not grand, war is costly. And if you want to look at exactly how bad war is, look at Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings. Look at how he describes Mordor versus how he describes the Shire. That is his mind, war machines versus peaceful tranquility and peace. Everybody knew, you're just discovering war is bad and that horrible things happen in it. Well, good for you. You're behind, but at least you're trying. The issue with you is you're being pedantic, defending actual fascist incursions into sovereign lands. You're just being the actual meme for tens of thousands dead. Actually, I'm not, but okay. The issue, I'm not being pedantic. I'm not trying to moralize or over. I am saying, what do you want? What does this mean? Where do we go from here? Your basic argument is, I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with incursions into a certain area. By the way, an incursion happening doesn't make it fascistic. Another word that nobody knows what it means anymore because they've listened to TikTok and think that they're intellectual, or they've watched or they listen to NPR, or read an Al Jazeera post when Al Jazeera literally sends its correspondents, their correspondents work for Hamas. There was a correspondent working for Al Jazeera who literally was holding hostages in his home. So, yeah, I don't think you should trust them. I'm not saying to trust Fox News. I'm not saying to trust CNN. I'm not saying to trust anyone. I'm saying to learn for yourself. But, yes, it is wrong to invade other lands and take land from other people. Gee, what a concept. Unfortunately, it happens all the time. And it is only recently that we think that it is wrong. So you can I can understand why someone would complain about what Israel is doing in the West Bank. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But acting like it's oh my God, it's the end of the Palestinian people as we know it is absurdity. Proportionality and magnitude is what matters. So the government committing the atrocities excuses the soldiers that they trained to. It's turning a blind eye to whatever their soldiers did. No. I'm not going to blame the United States military in 1945 for that one soldier who did what I said. Soldiers doing these things happens in war, and it's a horrible, awful thing that they should be held accountable for. But that doesn't mean that it's a military exercise sanctioned by the government. Yes, please like and subscribe. USA soldiers literally took advantage of French women when they were supposed to be allied countries. Yes, I know. The French also did a lot to help the Nazis. There was the Vichy France, there was Pétain. Saying that they are allies is a little bit of an exaggeration when they had to conquer France. But the truth of the matter is, yes, by the way, that never justifies the taking advantage of women on any scale. That's absolutely awful, whether they be friend or foe. That has a military reality that is truly abominable in any war. And any soldier who does it is despicable and not worthy of the badge or rank that he holds. It isn't a war. It's a top military destroying peasants. How can they go accurately have hit Iran nuclear sites and the pagers in Lebanon, but let October 7th happen for 6 hours and now Gaza is ruined? They weren't the ones that destroyed Iran's nuclear sites. That was the United States, and the Lebanese and the Hezbollah pagers came after October 7th. It was an amelioration. It was clearly a huge security lapse on October 7th. But I like how you're implying there's conspiracy theories, which there aren't, but I like how you're implying that, but there's not. So, I mean, question the narratives all you want, but everything I have read, everything I have heard, it's pretty much what we've understood it to be true. Yes, it's one of the biggest lapses in Israeli military history and security history. Hello, Dr. Hugh Where Israel shouldn't have let those dogs settle there, level of Gaza. Well, I wouldn't. See, that's where proportionality matters, because on the one end, I'm not going to say that it's good what Israel is doing, but I'm not going to say that Israel is committing a genocide. And yet, for some reason, I'm getting more criticized for that than acknowledging that, yeah, Israel's probably committed some terrible war crimes in this war. That's not a genocide. Dresden was not a genocide. Gaza is not a genocide. the conquest of Native American lands is not a genocide. I'm sure you think that. Some of you think that too. You're allowed to believe these things. I'm glad that you're studying history, but sorry. I know enough about history to know that the standards for how we've defined genocide have changed because of a reinterpretation of it, because we see things on a screen all the time and we are obsessed with them, and it's tragic and it's awful to see and it makes our blood boil. But those things were happening in every single war in human history. It is not an aberration. Sometimes there were genocides mixed in with that, and sometimes there weren't. Democrat Party has no good... Yes, the 7 countries war did happen, but Israel just kept expanding their territories, and now Gaza is just a thin strip of land. Actually, that's untrue. Gaza was controlled by Egypt. The Israelis took it in 1967. In 2005, they left Gaza alone. There are no Israelis living in Gaza. There are millions of Arabs who live in Israel, but nobody cares about that because everybody cares about, because everybody hates Israel for some reason now. Because it's really about the Jews. That's what it comes down to. I bet he's a Mensa. Well, thank you. I'm honored that you think that. Democrat Party has no good policies, so they turn to fake activism and socialism. Oh, great. MAGA is here, too. So we've got MAGA, and we've got the pro-pallies. I'm surrounded by kefkas and red hats. Islam was 1,400 years old, while the land was promised 2,000 years ago. The land isn't promised. Land is not promised. Okay? I do not use that defense to justify Israel controlling the land, nor do I use that to justify the Palestinians. Here's an idea that I've said so many times on this channel for almost 2 years of doing these live streams. The Palestinians have a right to stay in the land. The Jews have a right to stay in the land. Figure it out and share it and stop killing each other. Get rid of Hamas. Get rid of Netanyahu. Get rid of the Palestinian Authority. Find Palestinians who say, Jews deserve to live and we're not going to teach our children to kill them. And find Israelis who say, they don't deserve to live anymore because they have been trying to kill us for so long. So Arabs are actually closer than the Promised Land. The Arabs do not live in Israel. At least the Arabs are not from Israel, ancestrally. So you are incorrect. In Islam, it is a religious obligation to migrate to non-Muslim lands with the purpose of spreading Islam and establishing it as a dominant system. It's called the Hijra was. And ever since the Hijra, Islam has believed that it is a victim that has been persecuted because of Muhammad being forced to leave Mecca, which, by the way, didn't exist in the 600s, but who cares? I am a moron. Yes, I am a moron. That's the best argument ever. Muhammad was he might have been. Bibi has come to the UN with a map of Greater Israel, the literal prime minister. It's nice. I know he probably would like that. His attitude is, why don't we just take over all these lands that want to kill and destroy us? And I don't think it's justifiable, but I understand why he thinks that. So your concept is that if Palestinians who have been historically exploited and killed by Israelis should welcome them and open arms into their government. You just said... No, I've never said that. Yes. Because the Palestinians have never done anything bad to the Israelis. They've never made any mistakes. They've never turned down proposals. There were proposals over and over that would have given them their own state, and they turned them down. Arafat, Ben-Gurion tried to do it. They've had those proposals. They've turned them down every time. Because it's not about the land. It's about the people in the land that they don't want to share it with. That's what Abbas has said. That's what the Palestinian Authority and the PLO have said. It was only near the end of his life that Arafat said, let's share the land. For the longest time, he didn't want that. So, do you even understand what sovereignty is? Sovereignty is the ability of a nation to exist on its own without fear of invasion or being taken over by other forces. I am very well aware of that. Israeli sovereignty was violated on October 7th, which necessitated a war. Agree or disagree? I am clearly a tool. Clearly a tool. USA is going to fall in 40 to 50 years, according to analysts. That could be, yes. Mirror wars. You're not saying anything that I don't think is already true. You're just bringing up stuff and you think that now you're just changing the topic because you think, ooh, I'll be so horrified by that because because you think you can pigeonhole me. You're not. Well, the truth is somewhere in between. Palestinian extremism is the result of historical occupation, and unlike Palestine, Israel is being supported by U.S. and gets weapons. The answer might be two-state solution. That's what I've always said, and I don't disagree with anything you've said for us, but yeah. How has ICE packing up citizens affected LeBron's legacy? That was funny. Israel owns Trump. Israel owns your politicians. Israel owns your social media platforms. Israel owns America. Jew, 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 Jew. Yes, the Jewish boogeyman, which is Nazi propaganda, is right in front of me. Right in front of me. Yes, two-state solution was practiced by Britishers, and look at Pakistan and India now. It might be the only solution, however, who decides the territory. Pakistan and India are not a good example of a successful two-state solution, but they are far more successful. I need to charge my iPhone. I'm at 1%. I'm trying to get down to and catch up to the chat because I see other people in that I actually want to talk to. But give me just 1 second, guys. I'm not going anywhere. Okay, we're back. We're charging. I'm almost done. I'm going to catch up to the chat fast. Yes, I bet we can have an AI channel like this if we tried. Silly, but okay. Americans getting dog walked, paying them bills like good sheep waiting for their robotic AI replacements. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm waiting for you to like and subscribe. That's about it. Excuse me. Yeah, I agree with Faraz. Anyway, I want to talk about Venezuela. Trump didn't change the regime there, but rather he just changed the head of the regime. For now, he wants to change the entire regime. Let me see here. Thank you. I would have been happy to be. I would have been honored to be on your debate team. Crazy Cheetah is saying that Islam is disgusting. Certain aspects of Islam and Islamic history are disgusting. The Virgin Mary was 13. I've talked about this before on the channel. The whataboutism. I know I'm doing whataboutism, but I mean, just saying that Islam is disgusting is a blanket statement. So you're probably just trolling. So incorrections, you're misspelling incursions, by the way, and wars are necessary. It might be good information to feed to the AI overlords. Wars aren't, I'm saying they are unavoidable. There's a difference. The only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. True. It's Hegel. We listen to you and trust you not. It wasn't one soldier. It was a city of French women. Yes, there are many U.S. soldiers who did terrible things. So I'm aware of this. I know about history. So hello, Belisarius. All the information we have today from the past and from the daily routine in other countries, we should definitely learn more for ourselves. That's true. That's why I'm doing this. We need to learn from history, or else we are going to repeat it, and in a bad way. Democratic Party has no good policies. You're just copying and pasting. Let me see. For America, it's not worthwhile to take Venezuela oil, but Venezuela was selling cheap oil to China. Yeah, it was a geopolitical move by the United States to attack. It was much more about China than we'd like to think. What can Greenland do to prevent a U.S. invasion? They're not going to. The U.S. isn't going to invade. I really think that's a stupid idea. The topic was the Ottoman Empire, but we're well over. We're at 90 minutes, so I've just been answering questions, Belisarius, but it's great to see you. GK, a member, is here. By the way, GK has the emoji because he is a member, and members get early access, emoji, historical emojis, and all sorts of things. We are fully self-sustaining and supporting, although some of you think I'm paid by APAC, which is hilarious because APAC doesn't give me a script. I don't use a script, by the way. I didn't use a script today. I never use a script. I'm just talking about what I know. And you may not like some of it. You may disagree with my conclusions. That's fine. But fact check me. Prove me wrong about what I've said. I don't think that that's happened today. Maybe I've said a couple of incorrect things. Maybe I've exaggerated a couple of things. I'm more than willing to be proven wrong. And I've been proven wrong many times and had to correct my stances on a lot of issues through the years on this channel. And by the way, we've only been doing this for 2 years. We'll have our second birthday in February. So we're going to be entering our 3rd year of doing this. And I just really appreciate everybody for coming and liking and subscribing. You are part of the Friendly Neighborhood Historian. We're army. We're a peaceful army, a friendly army, a neighborly army, approaching 11,000. So Israel is an ethnic cleansing. Yes, that's why there are more Gazans now than there were when Israel took over Gaza or left Gaza. Yes, clearly trying to ethnic cleanse. There are more Palestinians in that land now than there was in 1948. Clearly ethnic cleansing. Good job, Israel. You're the worst at ethnic cleansing in history. Israel gave the U.S. the coordinates for the states. They destroyed most of the anti-air defense systems right before in sync with the U.S. They have openly said they have Mossad there right now. Yeah, except that that's not true. Why are Iranians shouting Trump's on the street? Well, that's interesting. We'll see if another green revolution takes place or if the U.S. actually topples the government. Gee, what a surprise. You do know that constantly saying, I know this and I know that, does say something about debate and having an open mind. Yes, I'm very well aware of that. You literally keep saying, I know what a genocide is, and has the population of Gaza reduced drastically, live in reduced amounts of land with military operations. No, it hasn't. Compared to when? Yes, compared to when the war started, 60,000 people have died. About. Maybe, probably more. Those are figures that the Hamas themselves produce. I don't trust anything Hamas does. You shouldn't either, even if you think that what Israel is doing is wrong, which many people do, understandably. There's a spectrum to this. When do you call it when Israel was sterilizing black Jewish? What do you call it when Israel was sterilizing black Jewish Ethiopians? Oh, they Hasmoneans, I think they're called. I try to remember. No, Hasmonia is something else. Wrong. I call it wrong. There. Why is a DNA test banned in Israel? Because they're all Ashkenazi Europeans. Ashkenaz was one of the sons of Noah's son Japheth from the Old Testament. It is the supposed settlers of Europe. That is why they're called Ashkenazi Jews, because they are Jews who lived in Europe, just like Sephardim are Jews from North Africa, and Mizrahim are Jews from the Middle East. So yes. And by the way, if you're going to bring up the 109, because yesterday was all the right-wing Catholic anti-Jews, and today it's all the left-wing Israel genocider Jews, who have better arguments usually. But it just comes down to Jews bad. Jews are bad. And Ashkenazi Jews in particular are bad. There are, yes, the go back to Poland Jew nonsense when yelling at Israelis I find to be so hilarious because it's complete bullcrap. The people of the body of the state, and the state is the spirit of the people, and fascism, people is the state, and the state is the people, the tools. It's authoritarian. And this is my smoking jacket. This is it turns me into History Hefner. Trust in Odin, Freya, Thor, and Loki. Well, only on Odin's day, Freya's day, and Thor's day. Let me see. Fascism is kind of an ant colony. I like that comparison. Thank you, Breakfast at Tiffany's. This is not a debate. It was a live stream lecture about the Ottoman Empire, but then it's turned into a Q&A afterwards about history and social studies, and everybody wants to talk about Israel for some reason. Israel is satanic. Oh, great. Samadin's here. Yay. We get to talk about Israel being satanic. Why do we get these people? Who are these people? Where are you coming from? And why do you just put the kiefka on before, like, I put the smoking jacket on? You focus more on the Jews and Israel than the Jews and the Israelis do. You're more obsessed with it than they are. You do know that, right? Who's to say you're not part of a giant cover-up run by the Jews to get everybody talking about the Jews so that reasonable thinking people like me can expose your bad arguments? Maybe you're the ones who are being paid by AIPAC to be useful idiots and controlled opposition so that reasonable people like me can expose your inconsistencies. Or maybe it's just the Alex Jones stupidity of Jew. Have you read any of Mehmet Anvil, the Conqueror's poetry? No, I should, though. The Ottomans love to write poetry. They love to produce beautiful art. Islam has produced some incredible art. Is he wrong? I don't know who you're referring to, but yes. Nick Fuentes is in the chat. Yes, Nick Fuentes is everywhere these days. Miriam Alderson. Yes, I know who Miriam Alderson is. Yes, I'm very well aware of who Miriam Alderson is. Do I know who she is? No. I have no connections to AIPAC. I don't really... I mean, I know that it's a political action community, and it supports Republicans and Democrats who support Israel, and it gives them lots of money, and Tucker Carlson thinks they're bad. Move on. Not everything is controlled by the Jews. By the way, the same people on the left who call everyone else Nazis, who disagrees with them, have really gotten comfortable with the Jews in Israel run everything. And the Jews in Israel have caused all of our problems, which is a Nazi talking point. If Israel owned America, how could Obama make the nuclear deal with Iran despite what Netanyahu wanted? Because they don't. Because people are stupid. Because Qatar has a lot of money in American politics and in American universities, but nobody cares. The BDS movement is funded heavily by Middle Eastern countries like Iran and Qatar. The Iranian supreme leader has encouraged the student protesters at Columbia and other universities against the Israelis and the Jews. And they've given them money. But we don't care about that. We only care about when Jews give money to American politicians, not when American universities get money from Middle Eastern countries that support the BDS movement. America only. Yes, America only. That's fascinating. which is funny because this isn't a political channel. I'm not arguing. I'm not a MAGA channel. I'm not any of that. I'm a history channel, and people are asking about history questions, so I'm answering them. So Palestinians aren't allowing Israelis into their government after being exploited and killed is respecting Palestinian sovereignty. I'm not saying the Israelis should be allowed into their government. Where did I say that? I said that that a two-state solution should be possible. Arabs can serve in the government of the Israelis. Why can't Israelis serve in the government of the Palestinians? Why can't Palestine be a country that just doesn't run propaganda that teaches their children that Jews are the children of pigs, which is a Nazi talking point? When will Mein Kampf be banned? Mein Kampf, no one can get it. I can't buy Mein Kampf. I can't go to Amazon and order it. But if I was in Egypt, I could get a copy easy. If I was in Iran, I could get a copy easy. If I was in any country that surrounds the country full of Jews, I could get it. Does that make any sense to you? The small country that has a lot of Jews in it is surrounded by countries that read Mein Kampf all the time and think that it's great. And we get mad because this country is militant and wants to take some of that land and some of their people some of them, not all of them, want to take some of the land that the Arabs and Muslims have and take it for themselves or continue fighting. Also, the Hijra was the Prophet's journey from Medina to Mecca. No, it's the other way around. The Hijra was his expulsion. It's what put a victim mentality into Muhammad. By the way, Mecca didn't exist in the 7th century, so I don't even know how accurate it was. When were they ever recognized as one community? They weren't. Islam doesn't care. By the way, the first person to ever identify the Jews as vermin was Muhammad. Not Hitler, Muhammad. And there are plenty of Muslims, and I talked about this during the live stream lecture, there are plenty of Muslims, like even in the Ottoman Empire, that have been totally accepting and tolerant of Jews. It's not always Islam. It's radicals. And there's Hars. Let me see. It was also referred to for debates on whether Muslims should go to lands where they cannot practice their own religion. They do. They go there all the time. Iran also selling cheap oil to China and has strategic importance in the economic war. Who knows? Maybe the United States is taking another swipe at China by taking Iran out of the picture. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Why do you think Christianity and Islam haven't made that much headway in China over the centuries? Great question. You have the Uyghurs. You have Christianity being popular. China, communism obviously stomped out a lot of religious ground that had been there, created in the 19th century. Missionaries like Hudson Taylor were very popular. In fact, the Boxer Rebellion happens because the Chinese Empress Dowager is upset that there's such a large European influence and too many Christians in her land. Christianity made inroads. Islam has made inroads, especially the Uyghurs are a great example of this. But the People's Republic isn't going to stand for a lot of that. Now, let me see. Yes. And he won't acknowledge I use the long-term and short-term to look at history. He only looks at short-term. He won't take an ego hit a little and look at the long-term as well, as hence we have issues. Yes, my own moderator wants to argue with me. This is just a sunny, sunny Sunday. Yes, of course, I look at long-term impacts of history. You have to look at the long-term impacts of history. I don't agree with your long-term impacts about the War of 1812, so therefore you think I don't care about long-term impacts. I like how you bring up something, you don't prove it, you don't have any evidence, you just say these things, and then you expect me to believe them right away when everything else you've said so far is not true. I've literally read books about this. I've heard testimony from survivors that says none of that is true, but whatever. I can't just say not true because then you're like, that proves you don't have any facts. I have heard the testimony of survivors. I have read books about this. It is a huge security failure. It was not sabotaged beforehand. There isn't evidence that says that. Let me see. Turkey was the #1 Nazi supporter. Turkey supported the Germans in the First World War and committed genocide. In the Second World War, it supported the Germans in the Holocaust. True. By the way, since everybody wants to talk about this, the Grand Mufti of Palestine wanted to take all the Jews from Palestine, send them to Hitler, and let Hitler do what he did. So the idea of hating Jews and wanting them dead doesn't come about because of the occupation. How is the Grand Mufti wanting to kill the Jews of Palestine in the 1940s the fault of Israel, a state that was created 3 years after Hitler killed himself? Oh, by the way, the Grand Mufti escaped, never faced trials for war crimes, and went and lived in Egypt for the rest of his life as a hero. Inconvenient history. Maybe I should change my name to Inconvenient Friend Hit Neighborly History. Why did more freed slaves go to Liberia? Great question. I think the abolitionists really tried to convince African Americans to stay, especially after they were freed. Frederick Douglass at first thought that blacks could not stay in America. Lincoln convinced him otherwise. There was the abolitionist forces became so powerful as a movement in the 1840s and 1850s, it gave freed blacks hope that they could live and continue to survive and thrive in America. If a population in an area grows 4-7% per annum every year when the population rate skews, I call it a genocide. Boy, there's a lot of things in history that are genocides now by that definition. Yes, populations are reduced in warfare. That's incredible. Does that make it a genocide? No. Was Nagasaki a genocide? What was Jesus? Jesus of Nazareth was a Jewish rabbi, who was killed by Jewish leaders, who claimed to be God. And the Christians believe he rose from the dead. That's it. That's all the history on it. Move on. Most important person in history, probably without a doubt. There's our social medias, by the way. They're pinned now. Patreon, Substack, and TikTok. You know the history, then you know that Turkey loves genocide, as Sultan Ar-Khalif once killed 5% of the world's population. That's what we've been talking about. Everyone listening to history, and I'm distracted by his lips. Thanks. Also, Medina, which was called Yathrib, invited Muhammad as a negotiator or mediator. If that isn't true, he fled there because he was kicked out of Mecca, but thank you again for proving that you don't know that. Nobody cared who I was until I put on the hat. Yep. Everyone knows the Jews are a red herring for the Jesuits. Oh my God, we've got another conspiracy theory. We're now on to the Jesuit conspiracy theory. I cannot believe this. The Jesuits who helped run the Inquisition in Spain, which killed Jews, are really... You can't make this stuff up. You can't make this stuff up. Only on the internet can you find such ignorance and stupidity. Do you honestly believe that Jews caused all your problems? The Jews have caused none of my problems. Anyone who believes that is just buying into Nazi nonsense in a different context. You are confusing Hijra with Umayyad, Abbasid, etc., which were state-led, not religion-led. No, I am not confusing them. I talked about the Umayyads and the Abbasids earlier. Those are caliphates. Those are Muslim religious theocracies that follow Muhammad after the Rashtun Caliphate and the 4 caliphs. Let me see. Or Free Dar al-Alam, which was legal theories, not Quranic verses. They were ignored a lot of the time. Yes. People ignoring religious verses happens in almost every religion. But you know a lot about Islam, so I appreciate it. Good to see you, Robotic Duck. Happy Sunday to you. Do you think it'll be easy to becoming a police MT? Do your best at it and you'll do fine, Phoenix. I believe in you. Jews work for me, therefore it would be strange to work against my own interests. You know what? When I get big enough so that I need a crew, I'm going to hire only Jews. I'm going to hire Jewish cameramen, right now it's all me, but when I get big enough to, have a daily script or have different stuff like that, when this channel becomes what I want it to become, and with your help, hopefully it will, like and subscribe, become a member, do a super chat, all of that stuff helps the channel. The entire channel is going to be run by Jews, except for my moderators. They can be whatever they want, like Hars and Harry, they are not Jews. But but all of my people who do equipment, if I ever get big enough to do that or help me run my podcast, are Jews. I just decided that right now because... Yes, I'm just wanting to get back at all of you. Did you already talk about the Janissaries? Yes, I did. The Ottoman elite troop and guard. I did. Stop the genocide. Where? If your feelings are hurt, sorry, not sorry. Please come back with dates, names, the scenario, and why you believe your point of view. Please have some knowledge and decorum and an intelligent debate. Thank you, John. Or to quote South Park, please show me on this doll exactly where friendly neighborhood history hurt your feelings. Because they are allowed to decide how their government runs, it's called universal franchise and political jurisdiction. Wow. I didn't know that. You're telling me this just now for the first time. Wow. Of course I know this. Yes, I know. Palestinians are allowed to do that, and Jews are allowed to do theirs. You have one society that's cosmopolitan, diverse, and actually has religious diversity, and another society that has none of those things, is run by corrupt bureaucrats, and is about to be, is fledgling. And would be swallowed up and before they would be swallowed up by Jews, could be swallowed up by other Muslims or Arabs as well. So that's what I mean by about to. We'll see. If they actually give them a state, that'd be fascinating, but I don't see that. Is about to be toppled, you could say, by its own corruption. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm very happy. If Jesus was alive, he'd be targeted by IDF snipers. No. The Ottoman had a rich culture of homosexuality in their arts. Modern Turks deny this. Mehmet the Conqueror wrote poems to his boy lover. Yes, having boy lovers in the harems were not uncommon. Eunuchs were not uncommon. Did someone say Jews? Can you give an example of two countries with a surprising historical connection? Portugal and England have the longest treaty in all of human history, and you wouldn't think it at all, but Portugal and England formed a treaty in the 1300s that lasts to this day. It was extremely successful because it was bureaucratic, but it was also a way to move up. It was an opportunity. By giving people an opportunity to move up in the world that they didn't have before, the Ottomans incentivized people, even Christians and non-Muslims, to become Janissaries. No worry, Frog Physics. It's great to have you here anyways. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Daryl, we're in our Q&A at the end of the live stream lecture, and for some reason everyone wants to talk about Jews because this is the internet. We're going to be wrapping up very soon. Also saying India and Pakistan is good for one of the better two examples of a two-state solution is inherent flawed. They have had multiple wars. It's better than Israel and Palestine. Let me see. Calling yourself a chosen people makes some people jealous. That's true. But I'm sorry, the Chinese called themselves the Middle Kingdom. The Europeans believed they were superior for the longest time. The Africans, every civilization in history every ancient civilization has a creation myth where they are made the superior to other people. This is what I was talking about with the Ottomans. It's not just the Jews who think they're the chosen people. Everybody wants to be the chosen people. And I just want to be a historian. Turks have had a hard time about their homosexuality in their empire's past. Honestly, it was probably the gayest culture I've ever studied. Really? More than the Greeks? I don't know about that one. That's a little bit over the top, in my opinion. But Islam and homosexuality have a very difficult relationship. Exile doesn't erase indigeneity. Africans remained indigenous to Africa despite the diaspora. Jews remained indigenous to Israel for the same reason. You don't stop being indigenous because you were expelled. That's an interesting concept. I don't think it's true on a technical sense, Noise, and I don't think anyone in the chat would particularly like that idea. But yes, people can hold on to their indigenous culture, and the more that they do, the more likely they are to return to that culture, which the Jews did, and the more likely they are to continue to exist and not be swallowed up by other cultures and societies. One of the reasons the Jews are so hated in the world is because, in historical terms, they didn't assimilate. I was talking about the Ottoman Empire in the live stream lecture. Now I'm just answering questions, Nicholas. It's great to have you here, though. Let me see. Did you know if you travel around Iran, it would be like visiting a whole region because almost all ethnic groups in the Middle East are present in Iran? Yes, that's true. Let me see. I do have evidence. I've showed it to you. You've just responded to my long-term evidence, so basically they got lucky, hence it's not that impressive, so it's not evidence. I'm saying that correlative evidence is not causative evidence. Correlation between the Americans having success economically and societally has nothing to do with them losing the War of 1812. Both are nuclear countries, and Pakistan is much more likely to use nuclear arms since it follows a militaristic doctrine. That's a fair point, Meraz. That's fair. You clearly know a lot about history and geopolitics. I don't think your conclusions are correct, but you clearly know a lot. So I appreciate you sharing. You should read some history then. Okay. Don't tempt me with a good time. Is there any conspiracy theory that you think has merit? JFK wasn't killed by Oswald. I'm sorry. Just doesn't seem physically possible for Oswald to kill him. Oh, here's a spicy question. Any character that history remembers as a good person, but you believe him to be a bad person, what about the reverse? Ooh. Bad person that's actually good? Ivan the Terrible would be closest. I still think he's pretty bad, but by the context of his time, he was pretty much just your standard king. Any character that history remembers as good, but you believe him to be a bad person? Gandhi. I mean, I love Gandhi, but Gandhi fought to keep the caste system in India. And if you want to learn more about the Varna system, watch my video on it. CIA, Catholics in action. Yes, clearly. Let me see. Yes, he was being persecuted with other Muslims, but he had already had communications about going to Yathrib. He was kicked out of Medina. He wasn't being persecuted. He was mad because they didn't do what he wanted. And by the way, where is the evidence that Mecca existed in the 7th century? Medina, sure. There is no evidence of Mecca. The Quran places in one place, puts it in Petra, which is not even in the same country. So, Memoirs is gone. Oh, well, maybe he'll watch later. Let me see. I'm converting for a job. LOL. Jewish people are like 0.1% of the population. It's so easy to let them get buried with social media inaccuracies because there's not enough of them to defend themselves. That's not really true. The Jews have a large presence and a large history of defending themselves because they've had no other choice. Otherwise, they would have been eradicated. I'm not here to defend the Jews. I'm here to defend the truth. And if the truth happens to line up with one narrative or another, I can't help that. I am a historian. I look at these things in historical context. If the Palestinians had wanted the land, they could have gotten 87% of it in an agreement with Ben Gurion. They refused it, not the Israelis. And by the way, that region of the world was not peaceful or stable even before. If you paid attention during the live stream lecture, you would know that. Converts to get my own smoking jacket? Yes, converts. Yes, congratulations. You're one of us now. Now we'll have you in the secret Jewish meetings. How did the Ottoman Empire get turned into furniture? I don't know why the Ottomans are called that. I don't even know if they're spelled the same. Was the Industrial Revolution fail? Maybe it's based off of the idea of the harem and the relaxing seats and things like that. Was the Industrial Revolution fueled by the economic implosions? Yes, definitely. Well, also discovery and inventions, the cotton gin, the spinning jenny, things like this. The textile industry is actually where it starts in Great Britain in the early 19th century. Samuel Slater brings it over to the United States. What do you think the world would have been like if Trotsky came to power in the Soviet Union instead of Stalin? Far more violent and deadly. At least if Trotsky carries out his plans and doesn't do what Stalin does, you would have seen probably far more wars, revolutions, violent upheavals in different areas of the world because Trotsky believed in a global communist revolution. People who want to romanticize Trotsky do not understand what he did to the battleship Potemkin soldiers, what he did, who were some of the first revolutionaries and some of the old vanguard of the communists. People don't understand that these people are not, none of them that actually seem to be good at the end of the day. These people are all power hungry. Trotsky just seems more sympathetic because Stalin is just is so aggressive. But Trotsky was just as aggressive. What he did with the Red Army against the Whites in the Civil War, well known. Hello, Turkish man, love you from Pakistan. Yeah, that's true. Pakistanis are Turkic peoples. And you are identifying me as Turkish because of my background, which I talked about the Ottoman Turks during the last lecture, but this is also a smoking jacket, which was invented by the British, smoking Turkish tobacco after the Crimean War. Do you watch Minuteman Milo? No. I should, though. Let me see. The meek inherit the world, the bold inherit their own. Okay, then. Interesting quote. If you compare two failed states, then you're comparing two failed states. It doesn't mean that India, Pakistan is better than Palestine and Israel. Hindus are persecuting Pakistan, Muslims in India. That's true. But we don't constantly... But when was the last time the Pakistanis killed 1,200 Indians, kidnapped hundreds of them, and the Indians killed 60,000 Pakistanis? It hasn't happened. The Kashmir War is the closest you can get. Muslims are lynched or denied homes daily in India. Yes. By the way, how did Islam get to India? What happened to all the Buddhists in India? Oh, that's Islamic history. That's inconvenient. Never mind. Hi, Jew in the chat. Me. Sorry, catchy. I am not Jewish. If anyone is disappointed by that, I don't know why. If Mexico were governed by a cartel state launching rockets at Texas, the U.S. would not be debating proportionality on Twitter. The cartel would be eliminated. Actually, they would be debating proportionality. Look at what they did. They took out Nicolas Maduro in just a couple of minutes, a 4-hour operation that killed a bunch of people that were basically military operatives. They limited civilian casualties. They got out of there. They took the dictator and they replaced him with someone else, and they're going to try to find a more peaceful government. They got rid of a socialist regime that was illegitimate, and everybody lost their minds about it. You're a fan of alternate history? I like looking at it, but I'm not a huge fan. Give me one long-term thing I've said you disagree with, friendly history. About what? What do you mean by long-term? I still don't understand what these long-term things are overall. After Taj attacks, there was an increase in violence against Muslims in India, especially the Maharashtra. Yes. Because Muslims have never done anything in Bangladesh or Pakistan to the Hindus who live there or the Christians. Absolutely more than the Greeks. They emulated themselves after the Greeks, and it was in their theater, songs, poetry. That would make sense. They did control Greece. They controlled Constantinople. They controlled the Byzantine Empire, which spoke Greek. That would make a lot of sense. Very interesting. What about William Wallace? Not Braveheart, by the way. Robert the Bruce was supposed to be Braveheart. William Wallace, this great Scottish soldier, kidnapped by Edward Longshanks and killed, basically gave the Scottish a rallying cry to basically overthrow the English. He's kind of their Joan of Arc figure. I don't know why he's not a saint then. Nelson Mandela. Mandela would be a good example of someone who's not as good as we think he is, but I do like Mandela. It's hard for me not to like Mandela or Gandhi or Martin Luther King. They achieved great freedom for their people, even if they were not always morally the best person. USA only got rich through new lands being discovered, and it has ridden the wave since then. Isn't that how all empires get rich? Did you not watch my video? Hey, Thread Pirate, Robert, thank you for joining us. Gandhi literally fought alongside against the caste system. Like, what sort of information is this? No, Gandhi did a hunger strike to keep the caste system going. He wasn't against the caste system. What do you think of the American CIA wanting to assess Bob Marley? I don't know enough about that, but I've heard about it before. People with a PhD in history from Oxford and Harvard known about less than 1% of historical facts. Okay, then. I hope to know 2% of historical facts. Gandhi is known for standing up for minorities, and he coined the term Hegerians. What do you think was the most interesting event of 2016? The election of Trump. Your choice or not, could you espouse on where you were educated, self-taught? I have a master's and a bachelor's. I'm not going to give more detail than that. I don't share where I'm from. I don't share my political or religious beliefs. I keep myself hidden. My job is to tell you about history. We're going on 2 hours now. Wow, this is incredible. But I've got such great questions. I don't want to end. Are you Turkish? I am not, but I would love to be. They're a fascinating society. Beautiful country. Ancient Jews or Judeans beat the Assyrians. If you knew the Assyrians, you know this is cool. The Assyrians were pretty nasty, pretty strong. They didn't necessarily beat them, but they kept them from taking over the southern kingdom of Judah after they took over the northern kingdom of Israel. Hegerians means sons of God, so obviously the guy who fought against the upper caste and the caste system caused the Varna system to solidify into the caste system. Okay, then. Is the news that Trump has been briefed on any major U.S. news story that's been around for a while really news? Yes, it's news. I know you're trying to undermine me, but it's news. Socialism, if held with the Holodomor and ethnic genocides in the Baltics and Balkans under Stalin. Communism, not necessarily socialism. I'm glad you love the show, Happy. We love that you're here. Given Africa has done nothing with the continent since independence from various nations, was getting independence a waste of time? I think the decolonization process was rushed, and that caused a lot of problems because post-colonial relations continue to hamper Africa. Africa is not bad just because of the colonization. It's when you want to talk about racism and the imperialism and the oppression of the Europeans, to answer it with a racism of basically saying Africa is bad because of white people and white people being there is racism. It's not only because of oppression and colonialism. There are other reasons as to why. Pakistanis are Turkish? Somewhat. Some of them are. The Turks were a migratory people who settled all sorts of different regions of the area. Communism is ideologically bottom-up, ideologically in terms of power structure, but in reality it is a top-down power structure. Pareto principle, you're going to have a top no matter what. That is, if a Mormon website's records can be trusted at all. Oh, jeez. I'm not surprised that you would have Turkish blood. All the evidence points towards Oswald, but learning a lot. You seem to know your stuff. I tried to. Oswald was not in a position to get the rounds off to hit Kennedy in the head like that. Anatolia history. Anatolia is what the Romans called Asia Minor. Pakistanis are not a Turkic people. Some of them are, I think. There's Turks living in Pakistan. There's Turkish blood in Pakistani people. You've got Turks migrating and living in different areas of the world. Delhi Sultanate happened, and like you said, was bad. Wars banned, and annexation back then were common. Yes. Yes. But exiling all of the Buddhists, Islam got there through war. Islam got there through conquest. So you complain about Muslims being mistreated in India. You complain about Israel fighting a war in Gaza, but you're perfectly okay with the reasons that the Muslims are even in India to begin with that caused that fighting. Hinduism is not a violent religion, not historically. It has become a violent religion in fighting Islam. I know you don't believe that, but, well. Maduro is probably pretty happy. Could have been worse. Let me see. Stalin conveniently ignored this Balkan genocides happening to further his communist goals. Yep, Stalin ignored a lot of things in order to further his communist goals. Do you believe Kaiser Wilhelm II was a good or bad person? That's an interesting one. Bad in the sense that, you caused a devastating war, you're the main one, but not too much more greedy or aggressive than Nicholas II in Russia. Or, I forget the name of the assault. I think it was Mehmed III or something like that. Yes, I mean, Mandela was a terrible person. The ANC did a lot of terrible things. I've read lots of different history about it. What history did you read? Norton has a lot on it. That's the general survey of it. I don't just read history. I watch history. I read blogs. I watch documentaries. I'm not just reading historical documents all the time. I think Trump is someone who plans on what he does before he does it, or has someone just takes random action and makes decisions suddenly. I think he wants you to think it's the second one, but it's really the first one. Knowing facts, bias, sourcing. Okay, then. The ancient Jews had laser beams and Jewish space lasers. Mandela should have ousted all whites. Okay, then. Amen. Preach it, brother. There are so many stupid people out there. Thank you. I try to go live. I don't have the patience for people. I appreciate you. Well, I appreciate you being here. I really do. Maybe we could go live together one day. How much did Trump's 2016 campaign, the first Trump era, change politics in America? Brought nationalism to the forefront of Western politics when it really hadn't been before. So you don't want to take responsibility for spreading misinformation about Gandhi. No, because I don't believe it's misinformation. I could be wrong. I've said I could be wrong all the time. I said fact check me. I don't know that you're necessarily right. You're not right about Muhammad, for instance. So you're not right about Mecca. You're not right about Gaza. What is wrong with one world government? How else can we? It triggers radical Christians who are worried about the end times, but it also is something that is antithetical to nationalism, which is on the rise. So people really don't want it right now. A stock is about to take off. Okay, have fun with that. What about Vaikom cigarette shop, which happened in 1924? Don't know what that is. Okay, you familiar with trolley problem? If you are such a situation, you have to choose between me and Nicolas Maduro. Who would you save? You? He fastest said that the elites were accepted into temples. Oh, yes. Well, I'm saying that ending the caste system wasn't a priority for Gandhi. And he actually did a hunger strike to prevent this from happening when India gained its independence. Not talking about what Gandhi did at the beginning. And you're very welcome, Frog Physics. Super Chat is very appreciative. If you become a member, that'd be very appreciative. Hindu rulers used to fight each other for territory. Wow! People fought each other for territory of the same religion? Wow, what aboutism to defend Islam? Great job! Facts, the true colonizers are Muslims. Arabs are from Arabia, Jews from Judea. I'm just going to read that and then just let the comments take off. Turkish friendship well valued, very true. I'm going to try to catch up to the chat, so I'm not going to read every single quote. I'm going to try to see what questions are. More caves, no more scrolls. What's the history of Greenland? Greenland was occupied by Vikings from Iceland, and then eventually the Danish got their hands on it. The United States actually has occupied it before, has sent in their military to control it during the last World War because they were worried that the Danes would allow the Nazis to use that as a base of operations. What's the future of Tesla given Elon's politics? It's going to continue to fall. Julius Malema had the best plan for South Africa. I don't know what that plan is. I'd be interested in learning. It's not a right versus left thing for electric vehicles, just that they're not as good as fuel ones, diesel ones. They're better for the planet. Mohammed now loves London. Most popular British boy's name, I think, is Mohammed. Can you talk about origins of Turkic people? I know they originated from East Asia, not Central Asia or West Asia. They settle in the Turkic areas, kind of going back and forth between the Balkans, and then I talked about this at the very beginning, and then they migrate into the east, into places like South Asia. So, Jews would clip coins so that they could make silver mirrors for free. Mirrors focus sunlight, cutting pyramid blocks. All-seeing eye is something that sees through everything like a strong laser. Interesting. I didn't know that. Well, the bullet that killed JFK was fired by a Secret Service on a driver with an M16. Safety was off. Okay, Dalits weren't allowed near a transverse temple, and so any roads near it were banned to them as well, which also caused close the trade routes they had. Gandhi didn't start it, but he's a supporter and another. Okay? That has nothing to do with what I said. The Greenland value never mentioned. Greenland value never mentioned. I don't know what the value of Greenland is. There is only war. There is war, and there is the effort to end war. In war, in peace, men, sons bury their father. In war, fathers bury their sons. That's what I think. Was it Horace who said that? Tell us about the Rhodesian Bush War. Don't know a huge amount about it. Wasn't that the Rhodesians trying to fight off the British? Well, thank you for telling me about Viacom. Good. I'm glad you know about that. Thank you for sharing that information. I now know something I did not know. So I'm learning something new every day, thanks to you in part. They're 100% better if you just count fuel batteries or a whole debate on their own. If you have a work for your vehicle, you rate diesel. Okay, then. Greenland and Iceland should switch names. Yeah, if you look at their climates, they certainly should. Okay, where are we? I think this is our longest live stream, 1 hour and 27 minutes. Well, no, we've gone longer, but... So the Vicoms, like Drugap, was the national movement to get the elites to be allowed in temples and allowed access to roads and water sources. Yes, I figured that out now. Surface level Greenland promoted. Trains are much better for national security and a heck of a lot cheaper. Not according to the U.S. in the 1950s, who built their highway system as a defense mechanism. All right, I'm going to sign off. Please like and subscribe on your way out. Super chats, memberships always help, but feel no pressure whatsoever.
You can become a friendly neighborhood historian for free by liking and subscribing. Check out all the content that we have here for you. Follow those social medias to get a lot on TikTok, Substack, and Patreon that you won't get here. Like and subscribe, and I will see you again. We'll be back Friday at 8 p.m., 6 p.m. Eastern for our Q&A. Ask me anything about history and social studies. And we'll be having some specials that weekend because it's a 3-day weekend. So Monday we'll be talking about MLK, and Sunday we'll be talking about the Renaissance because we talked only about I do read more on Islamic history. I will. I promise you. But also and keep the faith. I will do my best. Maybe even use ChatGPT if you need. LOL. But yeah, join us Friday, Saturday next week for questions and answers. Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll have a live stream lecture on the topic of Renaissance, the everyone you wanted for today that I didn't get to. And then next Monday, there'll be a live stream lecture for MLK Day. No more Jew talk. Well, if people would just ask questions that are not about Jews, that would be fantastic. Depends on what kind of globalist you want to be, but not really. Sure. Well, good night. Take care, guys, and have a great week ahead of you. And as always, love history. Bye now. Oh, the Rhodesians wanted to remain a state. I'll have to look into that. Thank you, Belisarius. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.